I don't know why Steam VR keeps going off every time I launch this game. I don't know if I should. Anyways. So maybe to conclude the Stunlock arc, what's truly amazing to me is that everyone in this fucking thread has in some way or another described to me some incredibly rare and totally unique circumstance that, like, I know 1,000 kids would kill for. And they're, like, fully admitting that they're like, I just did it for fun. Like, there's some kid out there who's insanely good at basketball, but lives in, like, a extraordinarily poor neighborhood, and can only play basketball at, like, the local, like, whatever. And then you have dipshits on Twitter like, yeah, I played semi-pro for funsies. I just did it for fun. Like, bro, what the fuck? For funsies? I wonder if I should do medium. I think I burned all my softs, didn't I? No, I have one pair of softs. I just don't know that on Monaco you need softs. Is it better to, but like the pit? So both soft strategies are 3 seconds better. The real kind of gamble here is if everyone else goes on softs, like pitting when there's pitting when there's little traffic is kind of the best, right? Or being on the track when there's little traffic. You want to be racing around when no one's on the track, because you can pass people in the pits. I mean, if they're all out there while there's a lot of traffic, they might not be able to pass you while you're pitting. I'll go with this for now. I don't know if Magnuson... Okay. That's what we'll do. Magnuson has no softs. So we'll put Mick on the soft one, and we'll put Magnuson on this one. I mean, apparently an untested setup. I know he doesn't. I don't know why it's saying that.
The drivers have now taken position on the grid, and it's looking like a cloudy day.
Like, we can get into what like the stereotypical definition of like a hobby is, but like the biggest thing is that there's like a Loki's gamble kind of thing going on, or Loki's wager, or whatever the fuck it's called, going on here, where there's a point where it becomes something that's not a hobby anymore, and the line to when that happens isn't clear. And that happens somewhere around like when you're playing like rep level or rep amounts, like you're putting rep amounts of time into something. And by rep I mean
and away we go.
Okay to push.
Okay. Can't get trapped behind somebody.
Wow.
Wow. I lost the position.
You're currently P15.
McLaren with a great overtake.
Oh, he's just totally gone.
Copy.
Okay, go back to standard. You also go back to standard. The only thing that's gonna help you now is DRS. Jesus. Thank you, Monica.
Okay, back off.
Copy.
I need to keep the tires as good as possible and push them as long as possible. Once DRS opens, I can unleash the tiger. Tiger, that was Mick Schumacher. Yeah, sorry, to go back to like the stun lock thing. It's truly amazing to me that like someone was given such. Actually, what do I sound like? It's truly amazing to me. Okay, I'm not overpowered by the sound of the car. It's truly amazing to me that you, as a kid or whatever, have like this, are like playing at such a high level of anything that you're doing, and you're just like, it's just for fun, bro. When there are like thousands of fucking kids that I know that would murder somebody to play at like that kind of level because they have like no opportunity to do so. Like that's just crazy privilege to me. I don't know. But like I wouldn't say that anything I like. Well, I would say that like what I did as a kid for video games was like for funsies, but I never played at like a super high level. Although it's hard to judge that because again, the types of video games I play are like this, or like Hearts of Iron 4. Played fucking RuneScape as a kid and stuff like that. Like I never played those. I never played like hyper competitive games or whatever. The only thing maybe is like CS:GO for a little bit, but I didn't play that enough. Like I can go check the hours on that. I think I have sub 200 hours on that game. Which is, yeah, not a lot. Because I type in Twitter so much, it's now become the...
And DRS is enabled.
DRS is enabled. DRS is enabled. Did you lock?
Can push even more.
Yeah, if Magnuson's behind Russ, like I don't know if there's much we can do here. I'd rather just stay. I might go aggressive. Eventually. Maybe I can go aggressive now. Keep the pace up.
Okay, Kev, no management required, so push as much as you can.
Copy that.
The question is, can you get around?
Let's catch him.
Okay.
I mean, you have to try, Mick. You gotta go for it. You can keep Magnuson relatively safe because he's probably not gonna get past, and he's behind like Russell and stuff like that. So kind of just have to wait for him to make a mistake. There's not much of a point in me fighting for that position, just to lose it because of he made a mistake. Oh yes. Oh, easy, Mick. Oh my God. Harvest a bit. Are you still in the lead?
Charge on, charge on.
Copy.
Okay, good job.
But yeah, I don't know. It's just wild to me to be like, oh. Like, yeah, I don't know. Some of the like ridiculous shit of like, oh yeah, dude, you browsing TikTok and Instagram, that's a hobby. Like, oh, okay. Keep it on for one more lap because once we get to DRS zone again, we should be able to blast through. And there's a lot of recharge zones. Should kind of naturally recharge a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. Oh, the problem is that Aqua has DRS as well. Might just have to wait.
Charge on. Copy.
Gasly's 81 tire. Come on, starting with 80 tire. So yeah, we're good to I mean, they've been using the old tires, but our tires are still have higher dike than they do. We're good. So I seem to have a lot of gas right now as well. We'll do a recharge lap, and then we'll go for a push. Both on mediums, there's a chance that it can pass them. Alonso's 1.7 behind the lead, so Vance is just going to chill. Making him push a little bit harder just to stay in DRS.
If you've got some margin, try to increase the pace a little bit.
Copy.
Meow. with it like this.
Got no ERS. Copy. Charge on, charge on. Copy.
Crash on the course. Where? Safety car?
It's a crash! Let's take a closer look. Let's take another look. There we have Joe. Thank goodness nobody else was involved. That was a big crash.
That was a big crash, and now he's just back on the course and racing. It's my only gripe with this. That was a big crash, except for he's like totally fine and just racing now. He has to just go pit.
More lifting coast, please.
Copy.
There's pinning. These two.
We need a back off.
Copy.
Okay, make charge off. Understood.
Now the biggest risk now is like we kind of used our spread up to try to get past them, so now we just have to hope that we don't lose enough tire degradation that we get out of their like, range. That's kind of the struggle now. The fuck is my ear? Yeah. Because I don't want to go like a second behind. I don't want to fall out of their DRS range just because I have like high degradation. Keep that to a minimum. So is there any memes to watch here? Or any reacting we can do? This we can just listen.
Nation and renewed talk around protection for politicians. This after an aggressive attack on Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland.
Chrystia, what are you doing in Alberta?
What the fuck?
Now, this is the video of the incident and the tirade that has been causing a major stir on social media. Freeland was in Grand Prairie, Alberta on Friday when she was confronted by these people, including the man you see shouting those profanities. She acknowledged the incident in a tweet on Saturday, saying the Alberta I know is filled with kind and welcoming people, and one unpleasant incident doesn't change that. CBC's Hillary Johnstone is in Ottawa with more on this. Hillary, both sides of the aisle for political parties are coming down hard on this incident. Take us through some of the reaction.
That's right, they are. And yes, as the Deputy Prime Minister said, maybe it was one unpleasant incident, but what we're hearing from politicians on all sides, like you say, Hannah, is that this is not acceptable. So we've heard that from the Alberta Premier, Jason Kenney. We've heard it from former Liberal cabinet ministers, such as Catherine McKenna, who has also experienced this sort of intimidation in the past. We're also hearing from the Prime Minister as well with his reaction. Here's what he said.
Threats violence, intimidation of any kind are always unacceptable. And this kind of cowardly behavior threatens and undermines our democracy and our values of openness and respect upon which Canada was built.
So the Prime Minister there with his reaction. Now, we've also heard from a number of the Conservative leadership candidates as well, including Jean Charest, who said that it was dangerous behavior. We've heard from Pierre Poilievre as well, who said that he himself has experienced intimidation, and he gave his reaction, and here's what he said.
This is all too common and all too long-standing. We have to put an end to it and demand that everybody treat other Canadians with respect when we debate political ideas.
Sure. So reaction really pouring in, Hannah, in the couple of days since that incident happened on Friday.
And Hillary, there's a renewed discussion about security for ministers. What can you tell us about that?
Renewed discussion amid concerns that we might see this again. We might see more of this sort of behavior. So what we're hearing from various security experts is that, typically ministers don't have security. The security is for the Prime Minister unless there is some sort of specific threat, and that there's a resource issue here as well. So here's a little bit of what we've heard.
Ministers, other members of cabinets or other politicians may at times be protected, depending on whether there is a threat assessment that suggests that there is an imminent risk, imminent harm. The challenge, of course, is that resources here are limited. Bringing in additional resources, these resources need to come from somewhere, and the RCMP is already short-staffed.
And Hannah, the other thing that we've heard from different experts over the past couple of days as they've been watching this and reacting to it is that they worry that there's a bit of a rage machine operating right now in the country. People who are upset for various reasons, and that this is how they react, that this is how they behave. Experts say that they are concerned that this sort of behavior is something that we are going to see continue. Not just these isolated incidents, but a trend of seeing this sort of thing. Part of the reason why we are now having these discussions about possible increased security. Freeland's team is not discussing that, and at this point, the
Can Democrats win in the fall by running on maintaining and restoring abortion rights? We have an early signal that suggests the answer, at least in some districts, might be yes. This is a super interesting story. Democrats just won a swing district by focusing on abortion, and that should scare Republicans, writes Philip Elliott for Time magazine. This is a very interesting situation. Now an unexpected echo to yesterday's column. Democrats may not be toast in the House. It's a long shot, but there's a new data point from Tuesday evening that makes it
Come on, let's close the gap to the cars ahead.
Sending Republicans in Washington into a late-night scramble. How had they gotten a New York special election so wrong? The seat representing New York's 19th congressional district opened in May when Congressman Delgado was appointed lieutenant governor. Obama twice won the Hudson River Valley district before it pivoted to Trump in 2016, and Biden.
Wash picture in there. How does VOT water? Okay, I was watching that. I want to cast it. Oh, okay. I didn't see that actually. Like here, I guess. Let's see.
Charge on, please.
Copy that.
Bro, what the fuck? Why are you like a second behind? Jesus, gotta keep attacking.
Come on, Kev, you can do this.
Copy that.
Push your level 2 to get back into the zone. Okay. Keep attacking when we charge. Once it's charged, turn it off.
Yo!
Howdy.
Hey! How are you doing?
I am doing well. Sorry for the delay in calling you.
Ah, you're good, man. I have gotten a message from our mutual friend Surus, calling you a degen and saying that his subathon is still going and that you are to come on at some point. That's my opening.
Yeah, I believe I made that promise.
Cirrus is well aware of the fact that I take forever to respond to messages, though. So I'm sure they've not taken this personally.
Yeah. He and I talked a little bit about this. He said that he mentioned to you, he was also interested in talking to you about the subject of the anti-theism thing. So, you know, but yeah, I guess, do we want to jump right into it? Or,
so the question is now.
Yeah, hit it up.
Hold on, that's right. The question is, try to pause this, but do I pit on this lap or this lap? I always thought I was supposed to enter the pit on this lap, and then it goes up into here. But sometimes it seems like it wants me to pit here, and then my deg starts here. My degradation curve. Is that what it wants me to? Or does it want me to pit here or here? Because I don't know. So, yeah, I don't even know. I don't know if I want to try with Mick. Well, actually, I will try with Mick. If I try with Magnus, then I get fucked.
Cool.
I'm gonna pit a lap early.
Yo, so I guess the first thing that I want to open with basically is getting a sense of your position with respect to anti-theism. We haven't talked a whole lot about this. I've seen you talk to other people about it, but I'm not sure like what your stance is. Like if you're describing yourself as an anti-theist, what does that mean?
I just don't like any kind of mysticism or superstition.
Okay.
I don't think we can make any prescriptive statements on metaphysics outside of the ones that are necessary for basic cognition. So like the metaphysical belief in causality, you know, the reliability of our senses, that kind of stuff. You have to make those leaps, otherwise you literally can't participate in the world. You would just have to die.
Right. We both agree solipsism is not necessarily the most helpful position, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
so to avoid that, I mean, you know, anything beyond that, right? You can make basic assumptions, but any metaphysical stuff outside of that, I completely reject, because I think it leads people into really dangerous positions where they're capable of making rational utilitarian conclusions based on information that I don't think is real. So
I think
for example,
what I'm supposed to
if
do
a person believes in some kind
is
of metaphysical
pit this
thing, like a
lap,
spirit or like a deity, you know, with a given set of values or principles, beliefs, something about the world that
so I'm
isn't
pitting
empirically
here.
testable, it's possible that they could arrive at a rational conclusion about the world that I would consider immoral based on information they have that I can't argue them out of. You can't argue a person out of like a metaphysical belief unless you're willing to do that whole like, here's a different interpretation of the Bible type deal, and that's not like a reliable process, especially if a person's not an adherent to a like a major structured religion. You know, it could just be kind of a crapshoot on how much their positions can actually be moved.
Okay. So is this a position that you have like a policy position on? Like, is there anti-theist policies that you would want to enact, or is there like, or is this just like a rhetorical point?
No, I'm pro freedom of religion. I don't think it should be extended to any kind of state persecution.
So
yeah,
I guess
but, I mean, it's like more of an ethical thing, I guess.
Okay, so like I guess my feeling on anti-theism is that if it's a position that in which enacting any policy relating to it would be like a violation of human rights, why do you subscribe to the position? Like, because I get kind of like where you're going with respect to I see like your position, but I'm wondering that, I guess, how do you get there? If there's no policy position that you can get with it, then that without violating human rights, then why would you subscribe to that position rather than going some other route?
Damn, Alonso, what
I
did you
think
get?
it's a cultural shift.
2 seconds.
I feel the same way about like gender abolitionism. I don't think you can policy your way over to that point. I think
Gotcha.
Am
I out in front of Stroll?
Discourage some avenues. I don't think there's any practical or ethical way to enforce anti-theism.
Yeah. See, what the hell is this?
I think like we
it just moved my deg curve back.
This in like the
I don't know.
The Soviet
I have no
and,
fucking idea.
Mao's China's bans on religion, you know, like the state atheism type thing, but like it didn't really change anything. Functionally, it didn't change anything even for the people who deconverted, because for those who didn't practice their religion in secret, a lot of them just started adopting mantras of the state with a religious fervor. So it ended up not really changing anything. It's like a long-term cultural project.
So I guess if you're gonna have like that kind of
up, then
this isn't necessarily where I was planning on going, but like if you're going to have that kind of behavior, what's your goal with anti-theism then? Like, what's the end result that you're wanting to go for there?
Same as with gender abolitionism. It's just something that I care about ethically. I don't think that it's possible to like vote in a guy who will make a big change or whatever.
Okay.
It's like a guiding set of principles, right? Because there are lots of things that I think are bad that we shouldn't do that I also don't think you can really legislate against. Like a lot for like a lot of abusive behavior that you would do to a partner. The only
car
stuff
gets out of
that
the pits in
crosses
front of
the
me. That's a
threshold into
huge
like
fuck up.
potentially illegal, like goes into like physical abuse or financial crimes. You know, but you can never make gaslighting illegal. That'd be insane. Can you imagine?
Yeah, no, I feel that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So it's like
Yeah.
you can't meaningfully legislate on that. But obviously, like culturally, we can still move towards the idea that you should treat your partner with respect.
So I guess let me get into my position then on anti-theism, because I think that I'm in opposition to largely what you've expressed. I think that your position is a little bit more reasonable than what I've heard some people say. So I've encountered a number of different perspectives on anti-theism, one of which would be like the lowering the number of religious people in the world and elevating the number of atheists in the world, for example.
Everyone here is the pit.
And I think that that gets into
we have pretty much open air.
dodgy territory. Does that describe where you're at, or does that not describe where you're at?
I mean, through a cultural project, right? Through people making the choice to not be religious, or the rejection of religious principles, or any kind of spiritualism, but not through any like state project. I mean, ideally, I would want to live in a fully secular world, yeah, but I don't even know if that's necessarily possible. Just
I don't
like
either.
Just like a mathematical sense, and I think any attempt to do so through policy or force would be more destructive than whatever benefits you could possibly extract from it.
Yeah, so I think that also the cultural enforcement issue.
Okay, so the clear thing here. So A, I think the way I did it is like technically wrong, but it's okay. But B, we also learned what Vosh's position is on this. Oh, Mick Schumacher just got the fastest lap. Fuck. Funny. Yeah, we're trying to make him catch up to everyone in front of him as fast as he can, so that when they all pit, he can all pass them. We can't really push on that, can we? Yeah, we can a little bit. Yeah, so we found out Vosh's position, which is basically that he wants to live in a totally secular world and wants to get rid of any kind of quote-unquote religious aspects. And this is where the problem is going to arise, because not all religious aspects are going to be toxic, but they can lead to toxic things, and that's going to be the crux of the argument, I would assume. Is that just because it's a religious thing doesn't inherently mean it's going to be toxic or bad. You could just do bad things with religious things, the same way you can do bad things with anything that's like religious. Yeah.
Issue winds up being not just as bad. It's just a different form of the same problem. Because you wind up just like shaming people arbitrarily. I think that let me suggest like a different approach, because I think that anti-theism stands in contrast to another social strategy of pluralism, and I think that that's a better approach when it comes down to coalition building. I think that when anti-theism is kind of like a scorched earth approach,
tires,
and because when you're setting yourself up as an anti to something, it's going to result in like toxic behavior. And the question with that is going to be, is the toxicity that kind of cultural narrative promotes, is that going to be hitting the kind of people that you want to hit with that toxicity? So for example, if you're an anti-fascist, you're going to be hitting fascists with toxicity. What's bad about that? Fucking nothing. So okay, fine. If you're with an anti-theist position, though, you do wind up hitting a bunch of theists with toxicity. And if you're interested in coalition building, that's going to be hitting a lot of people that are like on your side on most issues, with everything except for like their religious belief. So
I agree that for coalition building, it's always a better idea to spread the net as far as possible.
Mhm.
But obviously, there have to be considerations within that, right? Like,
yeah.
So I believe in coalition building with people, like lots of people with moral positions that I disagree with. I mean, I've gotten in trouble with the left for believing like, should like edgy libertarian-leaning kind of racist white dudes have an opportunity to?
Oh, this is just funny to say, but okay.
Join the left on some issues, like yeah, absolutely, because better to have them on our side than not, you know. But I wouldn't then think like, well, we shouldn't exclude or criticize those ideas because it could be more effective to coalition build with them.
Sure.
And I do think that spiritual thinking is harmful. I just think it's indirectly harmful.
Okay.
It's not harmful for what it is, it's harmful for what it enables. So it doesn't necessarily fit, because how often when it comes to like coalition building do you consider metaphysics, right? It's a little,
how are these people not pitted
it's
yet?
kind of a unique case.
How long are they
the
going?
whole like issue with religiosity. And my goal isn't necessarily to like shame people, because you can't shame people out of religion. God, maybe 1 in 1,000. I don't know. That's not reliable. But it's so consider it like a non-pragmatic position to hold. But I still think it's important. Like you still have to keep your end goals in mind, right? And that's
So why, like, okay,
there you go,
I think that when you're talking about an end goal that is like entirely secular, that winds up being like effectively cultural genocide at that point, because you're looking at an end goal of eliminating indigenous practices, several religions across the world, various types.
Yes.
Ultimately, right? Like it winds up being like a colonial position.
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
there are plenty of other things that I want like culturally eradicated, like patriarchal tribal structures. I think those
Okay.
are pretty
Overtake 'em?
harmful. I mean, if that means eventually the stigmatization of a bunch of indigenous cultures, then yeah, go for it. Yeah, there are plenty of cultures or cultural elements that I think.
Lots of tires a week. Come on.
And just spiritual belief is one of those for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So on my position on that is when you're looking at, I'm a big fan of looking at religion kind of like in a rational way. And I think that somebody can be a theist and rational and an atheist and rational. And I think that that's exemplified by the number of people that are in philosophy of religion who are on both sides of this issue. And so when you're looking at like an end goal and saying spiritual beliefs bad, I think that in order to have that kind of thing, you need to show that like the spiritual belief is the reason why it's bad. And I don't think that's the case. I think that the cause usually when we're criticizing religion is in some other place other than mere God belief, rather than, something else, like somebody being an authoritarian and being religious as well, and then utilizing that religion for authoritarian purposes, for example.
Well, the issue is that if a person's bad behavior is rooted in some way in a spiritual or metaphysical justification, there's literally nothing you can do to argue them out of it. It becomes completely impossible unless you want to adopt their own moon logic and just take a roll of the dice and hope that their brain ends up like reconciling those new pieces of information in a way that's favorable to you. But there's no real way around it. I mean, a big example of this right now would be the fact that a huge, like a bloc with a ton of political power in this country is fundamentalist Christians.
Right.
And fundamentalist Christians often believe that the global warming isn't anthropogenic, it's caused by God as part of the end times that predicate the rapture. And the rapture is something they're looking forward to. They have been for a very long time. So they either don't care about or actively kind of root on climate change, something that would kill hundreds of millions of people charitably, because it suits their metaphysical, like.
Why is this guy still not
morals.
pitting?
And there's nothing
Okay,
I
not
can do to
passive.
push them out of that outside of like pulling out a Bible and hoping that I can like beat them to death with the right scripture. Like, actually, no, not that. But you can't really argue them out of it, and that's very dangerous. Religion gives a supernatural pretext to existing justifications. It allows people.
Who's in front of me that's not before?
rest
Bottas
up
with like an
irrational
insane.
arguments, and make them rational through the
wasn't
addition of
Bottas behind me?
extra
Dude, what an
factors
insane
that can
pit.
only be justified metaphysically. Stuff like that is really, really, really dangerous, and that to me is the underlying issue. There are smart religious people and rational religious people. Einstein was, religious. There's a lot of that, but the religiosity is always itself irrational, much in the same way that intelligence is highly compartmentalized. You can have people who are very smart.
One second, my chat is freaking out at me and saying we skipped introductions. So
I'm
yeah, I hear your point and I want to address them, and we might have to retread that ground a little bit. But I do want to let, I guess, all y'all know I am pagan. I'm not a Christian. So I'm a polytheist YouTuber that does a lot of content around paganism and philosophy and that kind of stuff. So I'm here, and I make a lot of the same criticisms that you just made against certain forms of religion and even paganism. So,
but it's the logic, right? It's the spiritualism underlying it all. Even if you change the religion itself, the belief in any kind of spiritual or metaphysical force that can't be empirically accounted for, I mean, then you can justify whatever. Believing in a soul, for example, is very dangerous. If a person believes in a soul or reincarnation or afterlife or whatever, their weight on death is going to be very different than what a secular person's weight on death is going to be.
Okay, now, here's going to be the crux, okay? While that might be true, you can use it in positive or toxic ways. So, which side should I start this from? We'll start it from the anti-theist side. So Vosh is going to say that, like, oh, because you have an afterlife to look forward to, you're not going to be afraid to throw your life away for something because you have an afterlife to go after. Like there's something else after life that you can look forward to, so you don't really have to worry about what's going on in this world. There's an afterlife. And on the theistic side of things, you could just as easily argue, like, yeah, I'm gonna make this life as worthwhile as possible, so that I can have the best afterlife as possible. Because the good that I do here judges where I'll go in the afterlife. That's the two sides of the coin. Now, you can use, and then the toxic version of both of these is that for like an anti-theist argument, you'd say, yeah, what people judge as good things that will lead them to a better afterlife might be like suicide bombing, like Islamic extremists do, or you know, torturing gay people and blah blah whatever, like whatever shit that Vosh will say. Like, these are all toxic things that nobody here has to worry about because they'll have an afterlife that they don't care how much pain they might cause other people, because once they get to the afterlife, it'll all be okay. They did what they thought they had to do, and they won't be judged by that or whatever. But then the toxic side on like the theistic thing is like, for what Ocean will probably say is, okay, yeah, but if you're atheist, or anti-theist, or however you want to describe yourself, right? And you don't think there's any afterlife, then why do you care about anything you do in this current life? You could all just throw it away because none of it matters at the end. You can be as bad and toxic as you want because none of it matters. This life is fleeting and you only got one of it. So anything I do in this world doesn't matter once I'm dead. Right? That's the two sides of the coin here.
That's a moral calculation that just gets totally fucked up by the introduction of a lot of, you know, mystical shit.
So, okay. As far as soul belief, wait, were you saying there's a problematic part of soul belief?
Well, it necessarily cheapens death.
Okay.
It has to, because now it means
no, it doesn't have to at
it's
all.
not an end to everything. If you believe in reincarnation, you might think killing an unfortunate person might actually be morally right because you're sparing them that life and sending them to another one.
Yeah, I see. This is the thing. But on the flip side of that, you might think that you're sparing them and sending them off to a better life in the afterlife. But if you're an anti-theist or an atheist, or whatever, you might also think the toxic way of thinking about this is that you might think, oh, their life here is suffering, and there's nothing suffering about the end of life. There's nothing there. There's nothing to suffer. It's over. Everything's over. I'm freeing you from this pain.
Okay, so I've got a couple of distractions going on. I guess as far as like the soul is concerned, I'm heathen. I hold that the soul is in multiple parts, and that as one dies, that breaks apart, and it can be considered the end. I'm not necessarily against the idea of like reincarnation or any of that kind of shit, but at the same time, I don't see that as necessarily like a harmful belief. One of the things that I got into with respect to history on the belief of the soul and afterlife and that kind of shit. I'm agnostic on the afterlife. I don't think that you can reasonably... Afterlife is different than even God belief, in my opinion. I think that there's less of a case for afterlife than there is of a case for deities. But at the same time, I think that I don't have an issue with traditionally holding to an afterlife view of some sort.
But it's
that being said,
right? Like you could
well,
be like
no,
really dangerous if you're
I don't think that it's dangerous inherently. I think that you can wind up creating dangerous narratives around it, though. And I think that that's true with a lot of things. And I think that if you start saying that you're against everything, that in order to have that, if you're against everything that can have dangerous narratives around it, you're going to be banning or not banning, but you're going to be trying to be culturally against a hell of a lot more than religion. Politics, for example, is something you can build tons of dangerous narratives around. You can build dangerous narratives around the organization of government.
Well, wait,
that isn't,
the difference isn't just can it be used for bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's can it produce in a person a conclusion that can't be argued against?
Yes.
So
Politics? Hell yeah.
Well, no, because as long as a person is basing all their judgments off of empirics and your axioms are aligned, you can reason people out of arguments theoretically. But if a person believes there's a God and believes that God is telling them to kill, there's no moral argument you can make against that person. There's no benefit.
I disagree with that.
In the spiritual, there's not like a thing you get that you don't get through rational or empirical thought, but you do gain the ability to obfuscate real empirical moral judgments with spiritual factors.
So, historically, we do have some kind of like gates that are built up around that kind of subject. And there's a couple of historical thinkers that I want to kind of toss your way with respect to this conversation. And I think that this is where I get anti-theism doesn't necessarily work as much as a pluralist approach. That if you're going to be criticizing religion and taking a pluralist standard, you're going to be able to criticize those things in a way that is going to appeal to people that maybe even are ignoring empiricism in some way, which I'd argue that most people do anyway. I think that if you're outside of religion, there's a lot of people that will say that they are into empiricism, but generally aren't. Most people, a lot of people don't think rationally generally. That's my opinion. And I think that irrational or irrational narratives can appeal to people who aren't religious or are religious. It's the religion part doesn't necessarily predict one way or the other. But if you hold a pluralist narrative and say, instead of an anti-theist narrative, then you're going to be able to start building standards with respect to how we engage with other people. Somebody saying that, their God wants them to kill other people is going to be anti-pluralist. So if we're thinking with a pluralist approach, then that person can easily be ethically argued out if they're in a society that strengthens pluralism. So pluralism is a set of here. I'm going to send these to you on Discord. There's this.
I'm familiar with the concept. The problem is that you're building a rotting foundation. Like, you can arbitrarily develop a set of moral beliefs that align with mine through religiosity, but I don't really value those beliefs that you've arrived at because they're built on shaky ground.
Okay, so the things that I want to send you about pluralism are constructed by an atheist activist.
That's fine. I'll still disagree with them.
Why? They're holding it without any. It's an ethical system. I think that the criticisms that you're putting forward putting forward against religion are ethical, right?
No, the problem they're not ethical. It's not that religious people are necessarily less ethical. It's the system. They've opened themselves up to non-empirical information. They trust things based on faith. As soon as you start doing that, you introduce factors into ethical decision making that can't be accounted for and can't be reasoned against. There's no like backbone to it. I think a lot of people are irrational, even secular people. I recognize that. Yeah. But there are ways to address that through education. You can't counter with religiosity education. Because even if a person is highly educated, a religious belief that aligns them with different sets of axioms, or God forbid, if they're one of those types who thinks that anything God does is necessarily ethical.
I think this is a problem that will show up where I'll agree with you with respect to criticism of religion in this regard, but I think that it's something that it shows up with respect to specific religions that have supremacy narratives.
But it's fine even if they don't. It's still a problem.
See,
the
this
inside?
is where I disagree.
Oh my God, what a
religion
beautiful
that doesn't
move.
have a supremacy narrative. A lot of the things that you're talking about wind up going by the wayside. They're things that just don't show up.
What do they believe?
For my particular manifestation of religion, right? I don't engage in a supremacy narrative. You can be an atheist, that's fine. I can be heathen, that's fine. That's not necessarily an issue.
That contradicts empirical reality? What additional?
As far as like contradicting it, no. I think that empiricism is a useful tool for engaging with reality, just like I think that there are other useful tools for engaging with reality. If we're looking at history, like for example, if you're looking at history, you're going to be engaging with history in different assumptions that aren't necessarily empirical in order to build a narrative with information.
The difference is that those are analytical methods that are meant to provide a understanding of something empirical, whereas religion, superstition adds just like it's not analysis to believe there are like spirits or fairies or whatever. That's just an extra thing that a person believes.
And I'm against superstition, but I'm against superstition in a way that the Romans and Greeks have criticized it, not with respect to just labeling all religious beliefs as superstition.
Well, then what do you believe that I would disagree with? Assuming that I'm a fully,
I mean, I believe the gods exist, so we probably disagree on that. But I'm holding that the gods exist.
But you just said you were against the superstition. Is that not
right?
Like
and that's why I'm saying that I'm against the superstition with respect to how the Romans and the Greeks criticized it, not with respect to labeling all of religion as superstition. So when Plutarch, there's Roman and Greek writer Theophrastus and Plutarch. Theophrastus had a text called Characters, where he goes through.
Right, sorry, just to pause on this and just give a little like. So far, this Ocean guy is kind of doing really well. Vosh is kind of just stuck on a all religion is superstition or whatever. Like none of it is real at all. Like nothing about it is real or anything. So none of it can be applied to the real world, and because of that, anyone can kind of apply anything to it, and that's like the dangerous part about it. But that's true about anything. You can apply toxic or non-toxic things to anything in the world. What? Are you serious? The boat test doesn't even have DRS. Okay, we're gonna try one more time, and then we have to give up on this. Go with push. Yeah, like you can just do that about anything. It's just Vosh is just currently fixated on religion in any form. When like someone like this guy doesn't seem to be very spiritual. Well, maybe I have the terms mixed up. He's very spiritual, but he's not evangelical. Where, he doesn't think that there's he might think that there's a higher power outside of our existence, but like anything in our existence isn't like directly affected by like a physical God manifestation in the world.
Through a series of basically morally bad people. And just describes like these negative characteristics. And one of them was the superstitious man. And the superstitious man describes somebody who is absolutely debilitated by trying to adhere to every single religious custom that is part of his society, such that it negatively impacted his life to the extent that he wasn't able to live. And describes this as like a moral flaw, basically. So when you have somebody that is believing in religion in such a way that they're taking it to this sort of like extremity,
that's just too fast.
And
just too fast,
impacting their own life in a negative way like that. That's where you can criticize it as superstition.
My threshold is well beyond that.
Sure.
Point.
And so
I don't even like horoscopes. I mean, I consider people who believe in horoscopes.
And horoscopes can manifest in that way, where you have somebody who is, because of their horoscopes, afraid to live, right? Like that.
Yeah, see, like this is the point this guy's getting on, is that you can use things in different toxic ways. Some people can use horoscopes in a toxic way where they kind of just blame all of their problems on their star sign, like, oh, I'm X thing, so therefore I'm allowed to be this, or this is just my nature, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. You just have to deal with me as me, and I'm not going to do any growing. This is just who I am as this individual, as this star sign. I was born this month, so therefore I am this thing. And that's the toxic like, use of that. Now the positive or like cope use of it, or like the good use of it, is that you might just look at it and go, hey, wow, that's something that like connects with me, and I can feel like related to this person, or like certain things make me feel more comfortable based on these things, and like that's fine. Like if you feel more comfortable in things based on whatever, I mean, that's probably okay.
We see that manifestation,
like any at all, like any belief in it whatsoever.
I've got not the best opinion on horoscopes generally.
Safety
if
car.
you want my like absolute honest opinion, but at
They
the same
predict
time,
fascist
if somebody,
you're
talking about the essentialism thing.
Oh,
I think I addressed that in my video to you. A year ago.
Might be able to pit for mediums
but like,
and
I think that there is like an essentialism problem that shows up with horoscope.
I have to pause this. It's over here as well. Whoa. Oh, Magnuson, Mick just missed the pits. Okay, we can't pit Mick because he literally just drove by the pits. Magnuson might be able to pit. So we can't pit Mick because there's no chance. And Magnussen has even... Oh, God. How many laps are left? Less than 40. I just don't know if there's a point in pitting. Because it's Monaco. The only people that's worth it for pitting is these two. Shit. Do you pit? Do you pit right now? Let's just turn everything to conserve. Harvest. Harvest, conserve, conserve. Because no one can pass you anyways. Fuck. Mick can't pit, and Mick would have been in a perfect position to pit. Maybe I missed... No, I didn't miss it. It literally came up as the option as Mick was turning around the corner. So Mick can't pit because he's literally at the front of the queue at this point. But does Magnussen pit from all the way back there with Alonso right behind him? And if Alonso doesn't pit, I don't know that I could pass Alonso. Because it's really hard to pass people on this course, and we don't know how long this is go. I could just continue with hards for the rest of the race. I'm gonna risk not pitting.
Sounds like there's been a crash.
Oh, and it's Gasly who crashed, so that puts Mick in 10th. So yeah, we're definitely not pitting anymore. Sorry, Gasly. Oh no. Oh god. Oh. Oh. Yeah, like Mick is literally at the front of the queue, quote unquote, when he's in 10th. Like, we can't have Mick pit. There's no point. ERS is fully charged now. Neutral. I think he's gonna get reordered. Albon is the only one pitting. Alonso gonna pit.
Charge off.
Bottas pits, maybe, as well. Like, I don't think it's worth it. Nobody in the front is pitting. Only Albon pitted. None of the front markers pitted. Bottas didn't pit. I'm not pitting. Nobody pitted. Except for the people at the very back of the race. Lap cars could go through. Okay, we'll bring back the video.
Oops, true. I think that if you get into some forms of astrology, I see this is one of those things. This is a practice I'm not super familiar with, so it's not something that I would stake my arguments on. But you can have like fascistic expressions of it, definitely. Like that's, and I think that that's true of heathenry, my religion as well. There's definitely fascistic representations of heathenry where you get into heathens that engage in a supremacy narrative, and that supremacy narrative winds up being a racist one. And
but I don't want any of it.
Right. So you're not. I'm against the supremacy narratives. They don't have to be against the religion in order to be against the supremacy narrative.
But the religion's still a problem because it adds non-empirical factors into what would otherwise potentially be an empirical ethical analysis.
And so do a lot of, like, if you're engaging in mathematics, if you're engaging in logic, you're going to have to start engaging in some non-empirical stuff. Empiricism is not an end-all be-all when it comes to finding truth.
Well,
and
when it comes
there's
to...
several studies across philosophy.
So yeah, okay, he's about to say it, but like, this is what philosophy is. It's the empirical nature of like figuring stuff out, or unempirical.
That do not deal with empiricism, and I would like among them would be history deals with empiricism on some level, but you still have to make a certain amount of assumptions, such as the documents that you're reading are somewhat reliable as accounts and that kind of shit.
I'm not anti-philosophy, and I'm certainly not anti-analysis. I know that there are things that we do to obtain knowledge that go outside the bound of pure empirical measurement.
Right.
The
One of those
problem
things is
that
theology.
religious people make empirical arguments or believe empirically in things that aren't empirical. So the belief in the existence of a god isn't a philosophical framework. It's not an analytical
You're saying they
narrative.
believe it empirically?
If a person believes that something is capable of affecting the real world, analysis isn't. Analysis can't change the interaction of photons and molecules or whatever. Philosophy can't. It informs the way we make empirical decisions. But if you believe there's a deity that can influence the physical world, you're making an empirical claim, not supported empirically.
Safety car in this lap? Not even. No one's even.
Abstract
We haven't even like reconnected. Like I have to. Okay.
Like an analytical, no, like a alliterative way of describing
get fucked.
a process. You know, I would still take issue with it because this often takes the form of like the personification of natural phenomena, which impedes our understanding of it in a genuine empirical sense.
My perspective on polytheism would be like definitely into the realm of what you would be against then, because I'm holding as the gods as external agents. Mine's we might talk about imminent polytheism or something like that, and get into the kind of the various forms of it. But
then you think they're
again,
empirical. You're making an empirical claim there. Because if
as, no, I've held that the mind is non-physical. So, and I might be, I've been leaning towards like idealism lately, with respect to like my philosophy of what the external world is. So,
but can they? But like these gods, I mean, if they can direct the winds or control energy or matter or anything like that, they must necessarily be empirical phenomena. They're in the realm
you could
of
probably
spirit.
say some empirical things about the areas that they manifest. Like you could probably predict where the rain is going and say that that's Freyr or something like that. But I don't think that that gives you necessarily access to Freyr's mind or
Fuck,
anything.
like why was Landon Norris allowed to catch
knowing
up?
the parts of the brain doesn't necessarily
And I can't catch up to Alonzo.
And
Okay.
you know, maybe we'll develop that technology at some point, and it'd be interesting to see how that affects God belief,
Maybe
or
something
how
I
we
did, I don't
can
know.
interact with, like, if you have the ability,
why the fuck
some
is
sort of
Latifi
apparatus
here?
that is able to read a mind, and utilize
Whoever the
that in
fuck
order
this
to
is
have
in
some
front
sort
of
of
me.
communication
Get out of
with the
my way.
gods, and that starts getting
You're fucking
revealed.
my shit up,
Then
bro.
you start having empirical conversations about minds and gods and all of that kind of shit, and you wind up answering a few questions.
Where's the blue
with
flag on
respect
this guy?
to,
Jesus.
Mind-body problem and all this other
There.
philosophical
Holy fuck.
crap that we've been
I'm
hitting our
behind
heads with
bot-
for
this
millennia.
is
But that's
like
not where we're at right now.
Speed up and catch up to
You know what I
podcast
mean?
once I'm
The
in
people
DRS
doing rain
range.
dances. I mean, it's
I'm slowly separating
I have no
from
problem with rain dances.
I know, but I do because they cause people to starve because they thought they could solve their family.
Okay, here's another issue that. So this is the other toxic, non-toxic thing that Vosh would get into. Because they don't understand like some people's religious practice or some places' religious practices. You don't have to starve. Like rain dances are inherent to being starving. Okay, some people do a rain dance and then based on whether or not this rain dance, like, so the toxic way of doing it is that you rain dance and you do nothing else until like the rain comes, and you just keep doing that, and then you die. And now, historically, those tribes probably died off, so those tribes probably don't even exist if they did that, because it would have just killed them off. So how this actually manifests in the real world is that people will do a rain dance as an attempt to see if things go, because sometimes it works, and if it doesn't work, they go, okay, hey, maybe there's something else that the gods are mad at us for, so let's try something different. And then they switch up, and they maybe go out and find water. Maybe the gods are like, they might say that maybe the gods are mad that we're at this location, so we're gonna move to a different location and look for water elsewhere. And then they move and look for water elsewhere, and then they find water, and they go, oh my god, it's a sign from God that we were supposed to move. Right? That's how that can manifest in like non-toxic ways. And then the toxic way, you just die from it, and that tribe was like dead like 10,000 years ago. We don't need to worry about them. Evolution took care of them. And like today, if people are thinking that way, then like, well, they're just like typically not. Like that's not usually the manifestation of rain dances. And if it does, in like some ways, then that's like that's the toxic part. You can tackle that, but like the issue of rain dancing isn't the problem.
By dancing instead of other approaches towards agricultural management, it doesn't do anything.
Who the hell's behind
it? I don't think that it matters necessarily, like, as far as this conversation goes, as far as the arguments of whether or not God exists. I think that where I can hang my hat on and where you can hang your hat on is that when you get into the upper echelons of the philosophical conversation, this isn't a settled matter. And I think that I've even heard you say that we should be withholding judgment at the end of the day, right?
I'm too far behind Bottas now because that's stupid.
I'll withhold judgment when talking to people.
Maybe it was
If I'm
Albon, I don't
talking
know.
about why
One
I
of the two.
reject these ideas. I mean, I have to be forthcoming about it. I think it brings ruin. And it's an unreliable way of assessing a person's ethics, you know? No matter how you came to believe in what you believe in, the gods or whatever, you got that from somewhere.
Mhm.
And if you got that from somewhere, that means there's a source from which you can derive non-empirical beliefs. And all
Right.
it would
I
take
mean, you
is the
believe that it-
corruption of that source of information for you to potentially believe in the valid, like the nature, like human sacrifice. You know, people
Yeah.
did that for their polytheistic deities, and how could I morally argue you out of that? If you
Biggest day in
genuinely
10th, that's
believe
really
that a
good.
famine could be
Just that
settled
ones we
with
can-
a human sacrifice, if that's an empirical belief that you hold, ethically you're in the right. The problem is that your predicating beliefs are incorrect. The existence of that God, the value of the human sacrifice. But I could never argue you out of that.
So arguments against human sacrifice show up with Plutarch, and I think that, again, we can talk about pluralism with respect to human sacrifice. Harmful practices are going to be the kind of thing which, as a pluralist, you're going to be objecting to.
Why?
Pluralism, I think, is going to
Gods
be a
will
better
reward
strategy
us.
here.
But if
What's
the
up?
gods will reward us with bounty and food, if we prefer
I'd argue even then, even if you try to argue that kind of thing, I don't think that you could demonstrate that, first off. And second, I don't think that even if it's true, it's something that is worth engaging in because of the harmful practice nature of it.
We're not basing our beliefs on whether we can demonstrate it. That's the whole point. You don't either.
Right.
But
So
that's
if you're going
my
to say that it's a good practice to do, you need to be able to demonstrate on some level that it's a good practice to do. And that's not, if you're going to, especially with respect to harming somebody. So what?
You said you're okay with rain dances.
Yeah. There's not a harmful element to that.
Well, there's a very beneficial element to potentially ending a drought or a famine, right? I mean, if
Right.
they believe
Like if
that-
somebody is, I'd say that if you're, if somebody is engaging in rain dances or prayers for rain or something like that, that's not necessarily a problem because it's not a harmful practice. When
Right,
you're
but
talking
the
about human
prob-
sacrifice, all of a sudden you're dealing with harmful practices, right?
If people believe enough in the idea that showing glory to a deity will bring good
Mhm.
to do a rain dance, human sacrifices aren't that far off.
And
You
we
take a
object to
tri-
that to the same way we object to political beliefs that have the same kind of consequences. Genocide, group X, therefore, and
Yeah, exactly. So like this guy's getting into pretty much on the exact point of like the difference between those two things, like the line that makes one thing unethical and ethical is the same for anything. That's where that's where the non-empirical thing comes from. That line between sacrificing somebody and just doing a rain dance, like that's you having religion or not having religion doesn't solve that problem. People will kill things because they think it's the right thing to do. Like they might sacrifice. They go, oh, hey, in the Holodomor or whatever, we got to sacrifice these Ukrainians because of, or whatever. What was the Holodomor to that? I think so, right? I could be getting this wrong, but anyways, during the Holodomor, we got to sacrifice these people for the greater good. That's like the same line of thinking.
that'll be better for our society.
But I
You
don't
know what I
have to
mean? Like
argue
that's
against the religion. I can do empirics in there.
right. You're going to be arguing against something that can't be demonstrated until you know what I mean. Like this,
No,
if
but
you're
that's the point. Religious people don't wait to see if it's demonstrated. Christians
neither do the
pray.
political narratives.
Yeah,
If you
but
have the
can
political
argue
narrative
against
that
that
is
in
like, hey,
empirics.
let's do genocide X, then you're not going to have people that are going to go, oh, well, can you demonstrate that first or whatever the fuck? Like that's we've seen that a couple of times in history, right? Where
Wait, first of all, most genocides have been committed by religious people, so we're kind of shaking, like we're arguing on shaky ground, like from the get-go there. And second,
right,
like,
we're talking about mass
overwhelmingly
murders
drives
of
But
populations.
I'm not
I mean,
arguing
okay.
that
trying
secular
this
people
before, it's
are
not
always
easy.
rational. I'm only saying that adding the religiosity as an additional extra layer of like
Mhm.
immutable political like invulnerability when it comes to argumentation. If a group of people,
More
like a
distance we can get to
community
Alonso,
or
the better.
culture or whatever, believe there are gods in the sky that do reward them with rain or with food or with bounty when they show those gods glory, the step up to human sacrifice is a totally rational one. This is why I hate that like Westerners arrogantly look.
In the same, yeah, but this is the problem, Vosh. In the same way that someone can look empirically at evidence that, like, oh, if we just sacrifice these lives, it's better for the greater good. Look, we worked these people to death or whatever, and they died, but we got to feed 100 people. and then they can they can keep doing that until like they're getting into like borderline full-fledged like genocides of people, just simply because they think they're doing the correct thing, when there was a better outcome the whole time. They just never tried it because they thought that their empirical evidence was with them. That's the issue.
Down on human sacrifice and like Aztec.
Did I actually pass him? Oh, dude,
like that's so much more barbaric than the fucking Crusades, which had like 5,000, 10,000, 500,000.
I'm not going to be defending the Crusades either. Crusades are obviously a harmful practice and anti-pluralist, right? So, like, and I mean, as a pagan, I'm not going to have a good position on the Crusades. I think that even Christianity in general, you might be able to make some pluralist arguments against. However, because I think that with Christianity, we find a proclivity towards authoritarianism. And that proclivity towards authoritarianism is what lends to shit where you get into the justification of harmful practices regardless of the effect. Because now you have a supremacy narrative. Now you have authoritarianism.
But I'm not saying that you would be pro-Crusades. I'm only arguing that from the perspective of the Aztecs, the idea of human sacrifice was an empirically justifiable one. They already believed that showing glory to the gods would bring them bounty. So
empirical? Wait, what do you think empirical is?
Oh.
Because they thought the gods were an empirical force in the world. If you presuppose that the gods exist empirically, and they can affect the world.
What is empirical?
Sorry, maybe material. Maybe I'm misusing the word. Like a material. Okay. They believe the gods are a material force in the world.
I don't think that they thought that. I don't. As polytheists, we generally hold that the non-physicalness is an aspect of or as part of the.
The Aztecs did believe that
the Aztecs were not physicalists, and regardless, as far as like the Aztecs being, we can take it to another. Let's move from the Aztecs to the history of my. Hold on, 1 second. 1 second.
Wait, you can't 1 second.
Wait.
I'm gonna give. You can still talk about human sacrifice. I just want to move it to a religion I'm more familiar with. We can talk about the history of my own religion, which has human sacrifice in it, and we can discuss it from there. It's just I want to move it out of like. Out of that conversation into one that I have a little bit more familiarity with, but still has the same problem, so that we can discuss it substantively.
Okay.
All right, go ahead. So heathens in the past did human sacrifices to Odin. Yes, we agree on that. So go ahead and make your point.
Okay. If they believe that the gods are a material force in the world, which they did, even if they didn't believe the gods would show up and fuck them physically, but they did believe that. I know. It was Odin and Thor.
You had some euhemerus beliefs with history, yeah. They've got Snorri talking about how Freyr is part of the royal family of Sweden or whatever.
Literally thought, like in
it's a Christian's record, but anyway, whatever. Go ahead.
They thought even if they were just metaphysical forces, Thor being lightning would mean that he could affect the world materially. And if you believe those things, if that's a material belief that you hold, unerringly, people would be executed for heresy. I mean, you have to believe this to varying extents. It is not irrational. It is purely logical to then go, yeah, human sacrifices to honor the gods are a good thing. That's a correct argument if you presuppose the existence of those gods. And that's what makes the religious.
You can have the existence of the gods, and you can even hold that human sacrifice is effective or whatever. Not my position, but let's talk about it. You can still at that point hold a pluralist position and say, regardless of whatever effect human sacrifice has, regardless of it, it's still not a preferable position or preferable practice to have because of the harm associated with it. Doesn't matter. If the gods are asking you to do things that are unethical, then fuck that shit. Right? Like that's easy enough to convince somebody to do. If the gods are asking you to harm people that are your friends, there's no reason to actually listen to that shit.
But they thought the gods would raise their villages. The Norse, the pagans didn't believe that the gods were necessarily the arbiters of morality, but they did believe they'd be punished for not showing due deference to the gods. So if it's like,
and that's not something. Okay, so this gets into a misunderstanding of history with respect to pagan belief, where it's like, well, they worship the gods because they were afraid of them on some level. This is not what we see bearing out in history when we read these people actually discussing their own religions. Usually what's going on is that we see people that are giving and sacrifice and engaging in a system of reciprocity, gifts for a gift, that the gods give gifts and they give gifts in return. It's not like, oh, well, we didn't sacrifice to the gods, therefore we're going to be experiencing a tsunami tomorrow or some shit, or that human sacrifices were not participated in or whatever. like this is getting into like highly superstitious beliefs, which we have records of people in history bitching about and saying this is a terrible.
Yeah. So now the point is kind of shifting to like, so Vosh thinks that inherently within religion, you're gonna get into superstitious arguments just naturally. You're gonna fall into that. And this guy's point, which he's correct on, is that anybody can get into superstitious beliefs about anything. So the same way that people argued in the past about whether or not we should do rain dances or sacrifice people, we're talking about today about like, should we give should kids that are under 18 years of age be able to have access to HRT? Okay, right? And then in 100 years from now, if kids are totally within their means to be able to get HRT 100%, and like you're like, it's totally normal for people under 16 to transition into whatever, or in the future, if we move to like full veganism, right? Or like we don't process any meat whatsoever, we just like lab grow it. We might look back on this and go, wow, guys, we had people who were like non-religious arguing for the sacrifice of animals to feed themselves. How irresponsible and unempirical of them to do that. Why couldn't they just think better about their ideas? And it's just because you have like no, it's just a frame of like reference to like what the fuck's going on at the time. So we could be arguing about something today that we think is like kind of, you know, could go either way, and in the future we might be all like looking back on it like, wow, how unempirical of us to be arguing about this. That's like essentially what Vosh, the pit that Vosh is walking into, the Vosh pit that he's walking into, is that he's looking back on things in the past and kind of ignoring the context of everything around that and just thinking like, oh wow, they were so dumb, they were so unempirical about their stuff. But in reality, what happened is that they have no means of like testing this stuff, or like no really reason to. So, you know, one guy argues we should do this. Hey, you know, it seems like when we kill people, when we sacrifice people, there's more rain or whatever for our crops. And someone else goes like, no, that's not true at all. You know, when we do rain dances, we get the same amount of rain as if we did human sacrifice. So we should just keep doing rain dances or whatever, and blah blah blah. It's like that's what he's talking about here, is that at the time you can see that there were arguments about what is right and wrong all the time. And that can't happen in Vosh's idea of like a god, because they all believe in the same god, right? They all believe in the same god. Why aren't they all getting the same message from that god? And that's for the same reasons why some empirical things would be seen the same way in our
practice. Stop fucking doing it because of the consequences of it.
There would be consequences for not venerating the gods and benefits to venerating the gods. That's pretty common across.
And the consequence to human sacrifice is dead humans.
Dead humans happen all the time. You lose humans sending them out on hunting expeditions, but you execute one for the sake of keeping the god from raising your village or ending a drought. That's an ethical like argument that lands in your favor. Ethically, if you send a group of people out in a hunting party or a raiding party, we're talking about Vikings here after all, you're far more likely more death for less gain than maintaining a studious and reverent relationship with your deities. So human sacrifice is a...
I know, but the studious and reverent relationship with your deity isn't there. Like, you have to get something out of it. So if you sacrifice somebody for rain, and you're like, okay, now you know we're gonna have bountiful rain because we did this, and you don't, you stop doing that practice because you feel like you've angered the gods. That's like the whole thing. That's what he's getting at, is that like they used empirical, quote unquote empirical means. At this point, none of anything they're talking about is empirical, I guess, but or maybe it all is technically if you want to look at it on any side of the coin, right? They used quote unquote empirical methods to justify how if they would do rain dances or if they would do sacrifices or if they wouldn't do anything at all. So what would happen is that, you know, they might send somebody out on a raid and they go get stuff and they find out that, okay, going on raids gets us this, and we lose like 10 men per like 100-person raid party. Okay, cool. Now we're gonna do a human sacrifice. Another group of people somewhere else did a human sacrifice, and they got nothing for it. They actually all died because they starved to death. Okay, we're not gonna do human sacrifices anymore. But on the other hand, sometimes you fall into coincidences where you go out and human sacrifice somebody, and you get bountiful rain, and you have the best crop growth you ever did. So now maybe you do human sacrifices until it kind of doesn't work anymore, and then if it goes on long enough, you might have a culture of doing human sacrifices, and that just kind of happens. But in the same way that you might go out on raiding parties, and you do raiding parties because it works, and you continue doing raiding parties until one day you send out a raiding party and everyone fucking dies, and then they come back and raid your village and you die, right? That's the same thing. Both can be just as quote-unquote bountiful.
Logical thing to do.
But we see also in history that if the gods do not receive sacrifice, that the substantive damages that happen is not necessarily that kind of severe. People have been Christian for a long time, and especially now, right? Like if we're gonna be talking about religiosity now, with the arguments that we have access to, and not just what people think are possible religions that exist. You know what I mean? Because I think that what you're talking about is like, well, if we have a possibility of this religion in which we can possibly come to that conclusion and all that kind of stuff, this is where we get into the religion analogy or the politics analogy really quickly, that you can have people that are organized by atheistically, fascistically, and the problem there is going to be the authoritarianism. The problem with what you're talking about is the authoritarian aspect, not necessarily just mere God belief at that point.
It's the reasoning process. It's the belief in anything spiritual that does this. It's not the authoritarian aspect. If you believe, if you believe there's a literal God that dictates the rains and that it's represented by a capricious woman, and that glory to that woman in the form of sacrifice will bring the rains and end the drought. That all of the predicating beliefs, all of the material assumptions about the nature of rain and that God, now you have a logical argument for human sacrifice. That's not about.
You can come up with a logical argument for inhumane shit all the fucking time. The thing that I'm saying, and the point, one second, the point of this discussion of which I'm trying to do is not necessarily argue that in any religious construction you're going to be able to get entirely, moral people or moral beliefs in any subset. I don't think that that's something you can say about any set of beliefs. You have, when you get into an extremism or fundamentalism representation of any religion, you wind up with these serious problems. And that goes true for any ideology in general, beyond the spiritual shit. The spiritual shit winds up. You get extremist. What do you mean?
You can't equivocate this to extremist political systems. My argument.
It is the same thing.
Extreme religion. I'm arguing against the very concept of making statements about the material world based on metaphysical presumptions. It has nothing to do with how.
Well, we've already agreed that metaphysical presumptions can be made with effect, right? Like that, in order to study history, in order to study logic, in order to even to get anywhere in theology, in order to get anywhere with logic in the first place, you're going to need to make some metaphysical assumptions. In order to engage with the external world, you need to make metaphysical assumptions. Come on, we already agreed with that earlier.
Engaging with the world, that's not the same as also believing in deities that control the rain.
Right. If you want to explore spiritually, there's certain assumptions you're going to make. Just like if you want to explore history, there's going to be certain assumptions you're going to make. You want to explore mathematics, there's certain assumptions you need to make.
You don't have to make any metaphysical assumptions to understand history at all. You don't have to. You can keep that entirely within the material world. The metaphysics in our case are just bridging consciousness gaps. You don't need to then go, okay, because we have to bridge the consciousness gap, therefore it's okay to believe in fucking Odin. Like you can't jump that and then run to any metaphysical.
No, you have different arguments with respect to deities, right? Like, so with polytheism, arguments are going to be related to personal experience, the diversity of personal experiences, and then at that point you're going to be getting into some form of polytheism. That's the general steps that you're going to be able to get there, and people are going to continue to have spiritual experiences. People are going to continue to explore spirituality on the basis of those assumptions. It's something that you agreed earlier in this conversation we're just going to have to deal with. So from that perspective, how do you deal with that socially? And that's where I'm saying pluralism is preferable to anti-theism. Because anti-theism, in my opinion, is just another supremacy narrative at the end of the day. Pluralism is not.
That make them racist or sexist because we have tribal instincts like buried deep in our lizard brain.
Right, I'm not saying trust every experience, right?
Oh no, Russell!
So,
right.
Even though humans are going to keep having tribalistic biases ingrained into their brains, I think you should still principally fight against that.
What the problem is, and articulate what the actual issue is at the end of the day. And that's where I'm saying all the examples that you're bringing up are extremist fundamentalist expressions of religion.
No, they're
You're,
not.
you're talking about. Were you talking about?
Though, nice.
Horoscopes. That's not an extremist fundamentalist aspect of religion.
And horoscopes, we can probably agree, can be practiced without anybody dying in the process. I think that you make a point with respect to horoscopes where it talks about essentializing people, and on that I agree with you on, and I think I've said as much in the past. But I don't think that when you're looking at practices in general, you should be looking at them under the auspices of what harm they cause, and then making a judgment call on that effect. Because people, again, are going to be religious. People are going to continue exploring religiosity.
If you want to talk about the harm religion is causing right now, then you're going to have to wait for fundamentalist Christians to die off. Because we're talking about
and we need to be able to criticize fundamentalist Christians without attacking our allies, right? And that's why I'm saying pluralism is the way to go.
There are allies who have toxic masculine tendencies. You can still target toxic masculinity while being like you're jumping between like spiritual critiques and ethical positions and like the pragmatics of coalition building.
The spiritual critiques that you're making and the spiritual critiques that I think that are a good system to go under are both ethical considerations, right? Unless you think that human sacrifice is bad for some reason other than ethical reasons.
I think that it's bad for ethical reasons, unless you believe that there's a God who will end a drought, in which case I think it's ethically good to do, because you've now established supernatural...
That's just a bad argument. I think at that point, no. If you're saying that human sacrifice is ethical under certain considerations?
Wait. Why? Especially back in those days, we sacrificed people all the time to go on hunting trips, to go on expeditions, to go gather resources.
Right.
All the time they lost people. If you could end a drought that's plaguing a country of millions with a human sacrifice, that is an incredibly straightforward ethical assumption.
And
yeah, exactly. But the problem is, and I'm sure she'll get into this, is that it's not like people just did that and it worked. It has to work. People don't just do random shit and if it doesn't work, they just keep doing it. That's the weird thing that Vosh is getting into, is that he thinks that religious people just kind of did some shit, and whether it worked or didn't work, they just kept doing it for no reason, other than like a weird random twisted. Again, I'm using the word twisted, but Vosh just doesn't think there's anything different with that. Where it's like, no, yeah, it's not twisted. That's just their idea of what God is that they just tell them to sacrifice people, and we're gonna do it, and we don't care if we die of starvation. You know, that's God's will. But that's not how everyone thinks. You would send people on expeditions, you look at the sacrifices, you go, okay, hey, maybe an expedition goes really bad, and you go, maybe this time we're going to try instead just doing a rain dance, and see like what that gets us. And then maybe you get a more bountiful kind of harvest, and you send less people out on your expedition because of that, and that saves more people overall. Or you do your rain dance, you get less out of it than you thought. Now you have to do more raiding, and now you've sacrificed more people, so maybe you never do the rain dance again.
And in this time period, that is an extremist notion, right?
There are places in the world right now that are suffering from drought. What if you could like in West Africa end malaria with a human sacrifice?
Can it be done?
Well, I'm not religious, so no.
Right, that's not an expression of religion that I would be holding to. I think that if you're going to be engaging in harmful practices, it should not be done.
Don't charge on, actually.
Harmful practice is bad. Right, and we can make criticisms of religions on the basis of their harmful practices.
You would be saving hundreds of thousands of lives. If you believe it could be done, would you agree it's an ethically right thing to do? Like, hey, does anyone volunteer in the entirety of West Africa? One person is willing to lay themselves down on the table?
I'm not interested in getting convinced into some sort of human sacrifice notion. It's not something that I would hold.
If you believed that malaria, the biggest killer of humans, next to like cancer or whatever, could be ended.
Yeah, this is as my chat's kind of pointing this out. This is consequentialist thinking. I'm within. Yeah, if that would be a big difference between us then, because I think that an action that is ethically wrong is not going to be the best approach in order to actually deal with a problem like this.
It wouldn't be an action that's ethically wrong. The consequences of it would be good. Therefore, it would be.
Yeah, this is the problem.
I know, but the consequences of it would be good. But how do you know that? If you sacrifice somebody for a bountiful harvest, and the bountiful harvest doesn't come, what religious people at the time would do is go, "Hey, wow, our God didn't like that. Let's not do that again." That doesn't seem like a good idea because our God didn't respond to it at all. That's the point.
Sequentialism, not a
you just seem to have this weird thing that like for some reason people sacrificed human beings and it worked? Like, what?
Problem with religious thinking.
No, this is very basic.
Like this is your position, not mine at this point. That you're saying that if you held religiosity and were a consequentialist, this would be the result, right? But this is a problem with consequentialism.
That malaria could be ended with that. You would then say, no, malaria should continue. Hundreds of thousands should die every year. Not one person.
I think that at some point, if you have that situation as a reality, then you're going to find like a couple of consequentialists that are probably going to be engaging with that on a consensual basis between each other, and then the problem does whatever it does. But that does not mean that I'm necessarily going to be condoning it, because I'm not a fucking consequentialist at the end of the day. I believe that if you're going to be having practices that are harmful, then you need to be criticizing those practices on the basis of harm,
but
right? They can be. Sorry, I misspoke. These practices can be criticized on the basis of their harm, right? So,
like allowing malaria to continue, which would be the consequence of not allowing something.
That's not. Is the religious practice is not doing something a practice?
I'm sorry.
Is not doing something a practice?
Wait, absolutely. You're
okay.
You're absolutely
then
responsible for what happens if you choose not to do something. Yes.
Okay. Then sure, and that can be like a.
I feel like he should run an example by Vosh, and it's like, okay, so like, what do you think? Because I'm at this point where he's looped so many times, I don't even know where the fuck he's. I don't even know how he's. I don't even know where Vosh is anymore. So I'd run him through. No, you don't.
Okay.
I would run Vosh through an example of like, oh, okay, what would I say to him? Okay, I would have to run him through an example to see how he responds to this stuff. Because I'm, like, actually lost at this point. Where Vosh just keeps, like... At this point, I think Vosh thinks that sacrifice actually worked. Like, what the fuck? Because... So I'll run an example. Okay, so you have a tribe of pagans, whatever. And they believe that their god gives gifts. And they give gifts in return to appease the gods. Okay? They go out, and their typical days, one tribe, actually this is a proper example, one tribe goes out and raids, and they get a bountiful harvest, okay? They feed their entire village plus some. Another village, who farms more, does a rain dance, or sorry, fuck, I don't know which one would get better. You might flip this last example, based on how I'm feeling, because it depending on like the answer I get out of it, it could be better or worse. Because he thinks that the thing of rain dance is the bad thing. So I'll do it the other way. So one tribe does nothing and just farms like normal. They don't go out and raid. They just farm, and they get a decent harvest. Okay, they get to feed their village, and that's about it. They just get to feed the village. Nothing extra. Another tribe does a rain dance, or sorry, the tribe I just described doesn't do a rain dance. They do nothing. This tribe does a rain dance, and they get a bad harvest. People die of starvation because they couldn't get enough food, and they did the rain dance. What do you think is going to happen next year for each of these tribes? And then hopefully the response is the tribe that did nothing might continue to do nothing. They might try a rain dance, and they might try a raid. The tribe that raided will raid and continue to raid until it doesn't work anymore. And the tribe that did the rain dance and got a horrible harvest would probably not do a rain dance again. And they might go raiding because, let's say they saw the other tribe, and they might follow their thing. Maybe because they had a bad harvest, that tribe came over and took over their tribe, right? So now they're doing their practice. Or maybe they just naturally, decide to do some raiding instead, or they do nothing. That's like what's gonna happen. And then over years and years of like things happening, they may change their thought process. Oh god, Norse is caught up. Attack. Go hard. Deploy.
Okay, we're okay to push. Okay to push. Copy.
Don't let him take you. Same here. Attack. Deploy. Don't let him catch up to you. You have 2 laps to go.
Just push.
Copy that. Copy that.
But yeah, I would want to run that example by Vosh to see how he responds to each thing. Because what it sounds like right now is that Vosh thinks that the people that do a rain dance are inherently doing something wrong, essentially.
Charge on.
Copy that.
About a second behind. Norris is on his tail. That's like the feeling I'm getting right now. I don't know.
A large ethical conversation. But I think that at that point, you're going to want to talk about how effective those practices are going to be.
Well,
and now, at that point, if this situation arises, what is going to be your position? Do you hold that we should do the human sacrifice at that point?
To save 100,000. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then that would be your position. I'm not necessarily of that position because
did you go over it?
Of the harm. Do you hold and talk about how effective? Okay, then sure, and that can be like a large ethical conversation. But I think that at that point, you're going to want to talk about how effective those practices are going to be.
Well,
and now, at that point, if this situation arises, what is going to be your position? Do you hold that we should do the human sacrifice at that point?
To save 100,000. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then that would be your position. I'm not necessarily of that position because of the harmful practice aspect. Because then we're opening the door to doing human sacrifice for all kinds of stuff. We're building a cultural narrative and to getting into human sacrifice as a regular practice generally, and that's something that is going to be created. Okay, then we're
which would be the consequence of.
Sorry, I misspoke. These practices can be criticized on the basis of their harm, right? So.
Sorry, it's just not like he did what I said.
Which would be the consequence of not allowing something.
That's not, is the religious practice, is not doing something a practice.
I'm sorry?
Is not doing something a practice.
Wait, absolutely. You're
okay.
You're absolutely
then
responsible for what happens if you choose not to do something, yes.
Okay. Then sure, and that can be like a large ethical conversation. But I think that at that point, you're going to want to talk about how effective those practices are going to be.
Well,
and now, at that point, if this situation arises, what is going to be your position? Do you hold that we should do the human sacrifice at that point?
To save 100,000. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then that would be your position. I'm not necessarily of that position because of the harmful practice aspect.
No.
No! Because then we're opening the door to doing human sacrifice for all kinds of stuff. We're building a cultural narrative and to getting into human sacrifice as a regular practice generally.
Oh, no.
And that's something that is going to be creating a superstitious angle, and I'm not into that.
We sacrifice our soldiers so that they can affect good, geopolitical outcomes. World War II.
Fuck, no way I'm not going to get points.
Tens
Oh
of
my
thousands
god, I'm
of
going
our
to kill
soldiers
myself.
Can die because it's better.
That's a little bit different of a fight is a different practice than killing them yourself.
Blood is the only relevant human currency when it comes to great actions that are recorded in history books, I'm afraid. No matter what you choose, yes,
he's just
no,
faster.
I
just don't think there's anything
sure.
you can do.
But you're going to also agree that some of those actions are unethical. You can make an unethical action and have beneficial consequences from it. This is ends justify the means, and we see that throughout history too. It doesn't mean it's something we ought do.
Well, that's consequentialism. If the ends do.
Right, and that's where a big difference between us. Let me try and make this argument in a way to appeal to consequentialism, though. So, if you're wanting to engage in a way that is going to create change, you're going to want to get as many people on your side as possible, and therefore you're going to be wanting to engage in a standard rather than an anti-theist standard.
In reaching out to guys who have toxic masculine aspects, but I'll still sit on here and argue that toxic masculinity is bad for 7 hours straight. This isn't.
Sure.
I'm not pitching this to a crowd right now. I'm just talking about my basic beliefs about what types of thoughts are good, what's structured well. I'm not making the case for the pan-religious socialist union of America or whatever. If I was, then I wouldn't talk about any of this because I don't think I can convince anyone or affect any positive change while pitching it there behind the podium.
Right. If you're going to hold a position that is anti-theist, then when you're expressing it on your channel, you're engaging in political action. Right.
I talk about toxic masculinity on my channel.
Right. You talk about, and that's good. So do I. I've got a video on toxic masculinity as well. So we're on the same page with respect to that. But I think that we would agree that toxic masculinity is in all cases bad, right?
Well, if it's toxic masculinity, by definition, it has to be bad.
Right. So we can also talk about toxic religiosity, right?
Well, I would just think religiosity is toxic religiosity.
Right. And so, I think that with masculinity, you can have beneficial expressions of masculinity, and you can have beneficial expressions of religiosity. We can separate these issues by saying we're not demonizing masculinity. We're talking about toxic masculinity, and we're not demonizing religiosity. We're talking about toxic religiosity. And that's the criticisms that were being made by Plutarch and Theophrastus in the past. They were talking about toxic expressions of religiosity.
But I am talking about all religiosity. It's not about the outcomes. It's the thought process.
And so there's no beneficial religiosity to you.
Everything that can be done from religiosity that is good can be done through secular means. And even if that wasn't the case, I would still be against religiosity. It is so far down.
Even if it wasn't the case. Okay. This is...
You can get.
This is where we get into toxic narratives of atheism, in my opinion. This is where, if you have toxic veganism, if you have toxic leftism, you get like fucking tankies that have narratives in which they're better than everybody else. If you have toxic Christianity, that's when you get into authoritarian fundamentalism, where they think they're better than everybody else. If you have toxic pagans, you get folkists who are racist shitheads who think they're better than everybody else. And then you have toxic atheists who are anti-theists who engage in a supremacy narrative in which they think they're better than everybody else and want the world to be secular.
Wait, please stop.
Okay, go ahead.
Again, it's not about being better than religious people. There are plenty of religious people who are in almost every imaginable sense more accomplished and more impressive than I am. It is about religion, the openness to spiritualism, being a fundamentally destructive thought process that erodes the ability to make...
Same argument applies to politics, man. No, if you're open to political narratives, then you're open to toxic political narratives.
It's not about whether or not it's okay, again,
the toxic masculinity thing is such a better example because
it's not about toxic religion versus non-toxic. I am attacking all of it.
Right. So, unjustifiably, I think.
Okay. You may think that.
Go ahead.
You keep relating this to politics can have bad outcomes. I know everything can have bad outcomes.
Because the criticism you're applying applies there.
No, it isn't. Because I think religiosity fundamentally erodes the capacity to make logical arguments because you're capable of adding supernatural justifications for ethical arguments.
There's a whole study of philosophy of religion that it requires logical arguments of people going back and forth over this issue. And if what you were saying was true, hold on. If what you're saying was true, in philosophy of religion, you would have the atheists being like, these theists are absolutely crazy. They're not using logical arguments at all, right?
I didn't say religious people can't use logic. There are plenty of logical religious people.
Right, but you said fundamentally, which means that, right? So it's fundamentally an issue, which means that there's not exceptions.
No, yes, that is correct. Religion is fundamentally an erosive force when it comes to rational thought, but there are still rational people in spite of their religion, much in the same way that there are people who are overwhelmingly good, but you might say that it's fundamentally bad to undertip waiters. So you can have people who are 99.9% good, but they always undertip the waiters, and that's shitty of them to do, and that should be criticized, but it's still possible to be a generally really great person.
This is just a claim that you're not able to demonstrate, in my opinion. If you have positive manifestations of religion.
Okay, fine. If I am a rational, non-religious person, as long as you and I have the same basic axioms of well-being, it should always be possible to change my mind on something. If you give counterexamples on empirics, you should always be able to adjust my position. There's always going to be some variety there because so much of what people understand about the world is
you could have irrational atheists and all that kind of stuff. I think that we've already agreed on that.
Yeah, but theoretically, if you took a rational person and they were a secular, it should be possible. But if there was a religious person who had supernatural justifications for some of their positions, beliefs about the world that aren't tied directly to empirical analysis, even if you had the same basic axioms, if they had a disagreement with you based on some of those presuppositions, it would not be possible to change their mind because it's rooted in something outside the bounds of physical logic. You would have to...
This is where... All right, so again, this is where I was talking about ethical constraints on religion that we've seen manifest in history a few times, going back to Plutarch and Theophrastus, where Plutarch is criticizing the superstitiousness of human sacrifice and as a harmful practice and the effects of that. And then Theophrastus is talking about superstition as it relates to the harm to your personal life. Now,
curiosity,
if you can,
could you convince such a person that they were wrong in what they were doing?
if you can demonstrate it to them, I think that it can be difficult, but I think it's difficult to convince people that they're wrong on things that they're wrong about generally.
Ever tried convincing a religious person that they're following their religious doctrine too closely? That you think it's
Yeah,
easy to
that's
convince them
something that comes up. I've managed a community full of religious people. We have conversations around that all the time, with respect to, okay, wait, there's mythic literalism is something that is criticized within my community. That's basically within Christianity that would manifest as creationism. I think that when you're taking religious documents to a absolute literal standpoint, you're going to get ridiculous results, like thinking that plants predate the sun, which can be empirically shown as not true.
Wait,
right?
why would a person who believes in a god care about empirics? Why would the faulty tools of man stand up to the word of God printed on the Bible?
Yeah, this is where you get into fundamentalism, which is something that we're criticizing.
Okay, let's try this from a different perspective. I'm now Christian, or no, I'm actually a pagan.
Okay.
Okay, and I hold a variety of beliefs, and I want you to explain to me how they're morally wrong. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, I dedicate 80% of all my earnings to a tithe to the local church because I believe that if I don't do so, I'll be struck down by lightning in my sleep.
You mean a tithe?
Tithe, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like getting 80% of your earnings is something that is well beyond means. And like that's not, unless you're making a shitload of money, you're not going to be able to live very well off of that. And that's what we're going to be talking about Theophrastus. Right. That's you are bringing harm to your own life in your religious practice. And that's something that is not going to be helpful or productive to you.
It does, and it's the gods. So I'll die.
Right. And there's a point of like, if somebody is just dead convinced that they're going to be engaging in self-harm, there's only so much logical reasoning that you can give to somebody to that, if they're religious or not. Like if somebody is just like, if somebody's talking about self-harm from any number of perspectives, honestly, and they're dead convinced that they're going to be doing it, it's difficult to convince them out of it.
How can you convince a person that self-harm is wrong if that self-harm...
But I gave you a logical argument about it, and you just said so, right? If whatever logical, ethical argument that I give to anybody, if their response is so, and their ethics just disagree with you, this is something that is well outside the bounds of a religious conversation.
Wait, no, it's not. It's God.
Yeah,
the point of gods is that they're above us. You know, personally, I think it's, and this is, I'm being serious. Incredibly funny when pagans come on my stream and they talk about gods though they're buddy. They're above you. That's the point. If you die for them, that's fine. They are literally the mesh that holds the world together for you guys. The idea that there's a kind of like abstemious ethical argument where
with
like
polytheism,
we would never do a
hold
human
on
sacrifice.
I'm going to agree with you but also disagree with you here, because with the majority of polytheist traditions that I'm familiar with, yes, the gods are above us. This buddy thing, I would agree with you, winds up being like a different kind of toxic. And I think that winds up being like an overcorrection of former Christians. But at the same time, say what?
How is that toxic? If you believe it, you believe it.
The buddy thing?
No, the hierarchical them being above us, self-harm for them thing. Like, how is that harmful at all? It's just as
because you just talked about self-harm and then asked how it was harmful. It's harmful because it's self-harm.
No, that applies to my logic because I don't think there's anything above me. You believe in gods. If self-harm is being done for a god, what's wrong with that?
Because it's harmful.
It's God.
You can have ethical constraints on practice. This is not unreasonable, and this is something we see in history from polytheists, which is what I've been bringing up over and over again.
I've seen lacks of those ethical constraints demonstrated by polytheists as well.
Absolutely. And just as you're going to find ethical lapses within any ideological system.
I agree with that.
Right. So we should criticize the ethical lapses, not necessarily just the ideological system in the first place.
What if a person...
If I said that if I gave you every example of toxic leftists not being convinced of empirical arguments, right, and then therefore said leftism bad because of these multiple examples of leftists being shitty...
Again, it's not system can be bad. Every system can be bad. My problem...
Right. We're agreeing now on that. Right.
I can make a logical argument against a bad outcome in a leftist system. If a person believes that the universe is God and God determines...
No, but you can do the same thing with religion in the same sense that you go, hey, you're human sacrificing and you're not getting any better crop growth than we are, so stop doing that. I think he's explained that multiple times that you can do that. In the same sense that I can explain, like, hey, you don't need to kill off a bunch of your farmers by working them to death to get good crop growth. Just, like, make better technology, right?
What's right or wrong, there's literally no logical argument against that. It is logically bulletproof.
That's an authoritarian position, and that's what, like, so, okay, when you get into criticism of religion, and I think that you should be able to criticize religion, often what's going to be happening is that you're going to be finding fundamentalism, extremism, or authoritarianism. And if you want to criticize religion and be against the toxic aspects of it, you can criticize them on those bases. And I add to that supremacy narratives, which I think show up and these things will show up in multiple ideologies, and that's what makes them into toxic narratives.
What's toxic about the supremacy narrative if you believe that the god is above you? They're literally above you. So the supremacy narrative...
No, but, okay. I don't know how... I don't understand. The issue... To any person doing a toxic activity, they're going to think they're justified in doing that. That's the point. With religious people, that thing that they're holding above themselves is arguably not real, or to other from theist to theist, not the message from the God that you should be getting. On the flip side, for toxic leftism, let's say, you have a person who thinks that their worldview is so superior that they ascend themselves to godhood. That's what Stalin did. He made Russia think of him as a deity, essentially, because of his worldview, which was empirically calculated as the best one, right? Oh, it came from Marx and Leninism. Okay, it's Marxist-Leninism. It's my spin on Marxist-Leninism. I've got those two behind me. You know, you got me to run your country, and this is the most empirical possible way to do this. There was no God argument involved with Stalinism. It was all real world physical people coming to this conclusion. They were coming to a logical, empirical conclusion about how to run a country. You can only say that it was non-empirical at this point because you're looking at it retrospectively. You have 20/20 vision. Yeah, I don't like at the time to be able to debunk Stalin's ideas, you would have to look at what he mentioned, what did he say? Authoritarianism, the self-righteousness or whatever, like the self, like you think your religion is the supremacy aspect, and yeah, whatever he mentioned, like whatever he mentioned, just reapply that. I don't know why I forgot it instantly. Well, you just apply that to leftist behaviors.
It would be the correct one. It'd be logically correct, right?
This would be, do you think that the universe is bigger than you or something like that? I don't necessarily think that winds up being a supremacy narrative in that way. Supremacy narrative, what I'm talking about is when you have populations of people viewing themselves as better than others. And I'd say that you can find this in religion as a prime example with Christianity, where they believe that the fact that they believe in their God ultimately makes them better than others because they think that everybody else is going to be going and burning for all of eternity. That's the supremacy narrative, right?
What's logically incorrect about that?
What's logically incorrect about that?
That's the problem. If they're God's chosen people and they believe that all the heretics are going to burn.
Right, if you want to talk about like an internal critique or an external critique or what? Like, because you can have internal problems with it, and that they claim that their God is merciful, and then also is like sending a bunch of people to burn that he created, and then you get into questions of like whether or not he knows the future, and who actually bears responsibility if he's the creator. Especially if you're like a Calvinist or something like that, and you hold a deterministic view that God creates all of his creations, is omnibenevolent, and then also creates his creations in order to that generate sin, that winds up being self-contradictory and illogical, because you have God is the ultimate responsible element there, and is therefore responsible for all of the actions that people below him contribute to.
So, but like, see how he's getting into the toxic aspect of it? If you think that God has supremacy over you, and everything God does, quote unquote, God does, is like the will of the universe, and then you define God as like, you know, whatever events or whatever happens, that's like where toxic things get into. Or you can get into true delusion where you think that you're like the arbiter of like what God's will is, and your will is God's will. Like,
because he's the one who created
like
all of
authoritarian,
it, right?
It doesn't matter. God is above logic.
Then God is illogical. Now you're just saying, now you wanted to say that whether or not God is logical there, you just said God is illogical at that point.
Well, from our perspective, yeah, God works in mysterious ways. It's like Christianity 101, right? It doesn't matter whether or not God is logical. You can't mount a logical
All right, well, you
argument.
asked what was logically wrong with it, and then you said that God like is beyond logic or whatever.
Exactly.
So, all right,
So
now
your
he's
argument's
outside of
defeated.
logic, and that would be the criticism of the religion at that point, that it's not a logical position.
Well, yeah, oh, sure, great. Then he's outside of logic. So what's the
Right.
issue? They
So
say
that's the problem with it then, is that it's illogical.
What's the issue with that?
What do you mean, what's the issue with that? Are you saying that you can't criticize a religion and saying it's illogical?
Dude, I don't understand. It's like, you could just do this with anything, Vosh. I don't know how you don't understand that this is applicable to any worldview ever. Your form of leftism is illogical. No, my form of leftism is above logic. Like, well, how do you know that? Well, because I just know it. I don't know. Well, that doesn't sound very logical. So, like, that's the problem.
Well, hold on. Christians have been criticized for the holes in their story for quite a long time. And
I
yet
agree.
The institution persists. What is the issue?
And I don't have a problem with criticizing religion. I think that criticizing religion is a good thing, and I think that calling their deity illogical when it manifests in logical inconsistencies is good, and we should continue doing that.
Well, it doesn't matter if the Christian God is illogical. The Christian God is the Christian God. Logic is a human tool. Your mind literally cannot comprehend.
Yeah, but we both agree that, like, humans created God. That's the thing. Like, it's a representation of, like, who we are as a that's where we get into the toxic part, is when you think that God is like, you could think of it, like you said, with authoritarianism, where you think that you are the arbiter of God's will. Okay, that's the authoritarian version of toxic religiosity, is that you think that you have the right to impose your worldview on everyone else because you are following God's will. That's the authoritarian toxicness. The supremacy one is that maybe you're not the arbiter of your religion, but your religion, or whatever you follow, is superior to all other forms of anything, and therefore anyone that doesn't follow your religion is less than you, and then therefore can be killed or whatever, or we should go to war against them. That's the supremacy. And then I forget the rest, but yeah.
The logistics.
I think a lot of Christians have trouble biting a bullet and saying that their God is illogical. Every time I've gotten a Christian to go into that route, they start trying to backtrack real fast.
Yeah, like that's the thing, is no Christian will say that, yeah, my God's just illogical, bro. He's beyond logic.
So it's the question, if you're a consequentialist, you're going to be wondering whether or not these arguments are effective. That one is effective.
If I'm a consequentialist, I'm going to be beating these people to death with a hammer, because there is literally no fucking way to make a logical argument to a person whose ethics are rooted in religion. It's not possible. I've tried. You can't do it.
I think you've just tried.
Vosh, you're not trying hard enough, my guy. We've seen you try. Oh, what the fuck?
With toxic people. Like,
no,
this is...
It's not about toxicity. I can try to convince people who are wrong based on secular grounds. That's my whole channel. I can't convince people who are wrong on something ethically because they religiously believe in some extra thing, some dark matter.
I've been able to do it. Why haven't you? So I think this might just be a problem with the way that you're handling the argument at that point, because I've been able to do this, and so then we'd want to be able to figure out, all right, what arguments are you using there and why aren't they being effective? It's not, if you're just like haranguing against religious belief, it's not actually going to be effective as far as changing somebody's mind with respect to their deity.
Whether or not you're effective, the problem is there isn't a right answer. There's no reliable way of doing it.
Hold on. If you're a consequentialist and you're saying it doesn't matter whether or not it's effective, what the fuck are you going?
How do you disprove a metaphysically rooted material belief.
Well, we just went through saying it's illogical, right?
That doesn't matter. It's metaphysics. It's a whole level.
Metaphysics is constrained by logic. Ask anybody that's engaging in metaphysics.
It's like Vosh thinks that every religious person will inevitably fall down the train of like, well, nothing matters. I'm just following God's will, and everything I like is God's will, and nothing about it is logical. And it's like, not everyone's that fucking crazy, Vosh. Again, this is where the people you've talked to are the toxic version of religion. And those are predominantly online people. You can get into a lot of, like, I know a person who follows like a toxic version of religion, or is illogical in their belief of religion. And it's really easy to now, you might not be able to personally convince them, but you can get them to not like push their will onto other people. And the way you could do this is by just like simply stumping them. So someone might come up to you and go like, hey, based on my religious beliefs, I believe that abortion is wrong. And you go, okay, well, why is abortion wrong? And they go, well, it's just wrong. My religion says it's wrong. Okay, but is it any deeper than that? And if they continue going with like, nope, my religion just says it's wrong, so therefore it's wrong, right? I think that's essentially what Vosh is saying, is that everyone who's religious will go down this path. The problem with that is that A, you can very easily stop those people from influencing anyone else by just going, hey, this guy's arguments are illogical. They have no bounding on anything else in the world. My belief system is bound on something else aside from it's just wrong because it's wrong. I can look at abortion and go, hey, it seems like suffering, essentially, or like being able to feel pain and stuff like that, starts at about 24 weeks. Or 25 weeks, whatever. So anything after that is probably unethical because at that point, the fetus is capable of feeling more pain. Before that, and like having an experience. Before that stage, the fetus is incapable, doesn't have the brain function necessary, we can do this through testing, to like have an experience in the world, and has no prior experience in the world. So therefore, it's okay to terminate that fetus because it's not a human yet. There's a transitionary period between being a human and being a fetus. And that line, for me, is once that fetus starts having an experience, and then a religious person, like that same religious person, might counter with like, well, I believe that experience starts at conception. It's like, okay, we can test that. Do you truly believe that? When is conception? Well, conception is when the egg and the sperm like mate. And like form together. That's conception. Okay, so then you must be against like Plan B, the pill, right? Or yeah, Plan B and the pill, because some of those things, Plan B specifically, and some forms of like other contraception, work by stopping the fertilized egg from attaching to the womb, and that's how it works as contraception. So are you against those things? And then now they might say, no, I'm not against those things. It's okay to take Plan B and to take contraception, but life still starts at conception. And then you could attack that on right there, boom, that's illogical. That doesn't make any sense. So you attack that, go, are you sure about that? So you think that life begins at conception, but you're okay with terminating something after conception, because that's how Plan B and the pill works, or some forms of the pill work. And then you might get them to admit that, like, okay, yeah, sure, I'm against Plan B and the pill. No woman should be able to. Maybe you go through the argument and you end up convincing them to go deeper. And you go, okay, so now you're in a deeper pit, and now we can apply that to a bunch of other things, and we can see how deep it goes. So if life truly begins at conception, how can you tell, or A, how can you tell if something's been conceived? And like, is there any kind of testing for that? And as well, do you find that there's a problem with the amount of miscarriages that go around? Shouldn't we start rounding up women, and like every time that they have sex ever, they should be tested to see if there's a conceived child in there, because you're killing a human at that point, right? Any miscarriage ever is a child that's being just killed that could be prevented. We can prevent that stuff if we test and monitor women who have had sex. We can prevent those deaths. Right? If we have regulated sex, where like every time you have sex, a woman then goes into a ward or whatever. They go to the hospital and they're there and they're testing to see if there's a fertilized egg in there. And then once they find the fertilized egg, now what do you do? Because I don't know that we have the technology to take out that fertilized egg and bring it to birth, but the body in some way has rejected that egg for whatever reason, and it's about to be miscarried because of a million factors. What do you do with that thing? We have the technology to detect that it's there, but now what do you do with this fertilized egg? Do we just freeze it and leave it? Or we leave it alone? Are you really here to say that every woman needs to be monitored after they have any kind of sex? Because there's a chance that they might accidentally miscarry a human life? Is that really the world you want? And you can attack them on that. You can go deeper. And then if they say yes to that we should monitor, we should monitor women. It's like, okay, now you're in like some crazy worldview that we can continue to go down the path of like attacking that, but it's just gonna get deeper and deeper and deeper. Like maybe a religious person does want that kind of worldview. And once you get deep enough, you just kind of have to hope that everyone around them disagrees with that worldview, that worldview doesn't continue, essentially, right? Because you can get into some pretty crazy stuff and it be logically consistent, right? If I'm a person, I could logically follow that, yeah, I'm against abortion because it's killing a human life. Human life starts at conception. So you can't have sex unless, of course, it's for not repopulation. Holy shit. Reproduction. You can only have sex if it's for reproduction. And the moment you have any kind of sex, we have to monitor you to make sure that you don't accidentally miscarry the child. We're going to make sure that you're monitored so that because we have the technology to do that. So we should be doing that and that logically follows that we should be doing that. And now you have to argue, it's like, okay, should we really be holding women essentially against their will to make sure that a human life doesn't die? Is that really like something we should be doing? And then if they agree to that, like, okay, you know what? Sure. Sure. I don't want to get too much into this, but just as a quick like addendum, right? Sure. Having a miscarriage isn't killing a human being. We're not going to consider that killing a human being. It's like, well, then what is it? Well, it's an accidental death of a human being. Well, but we have the opportunity to stop that accidental death of a human being. And there's a bunch of, and then, oh god, I don't want to keep going on this because there's a million worms I just opened up where it's like, okay, well, a lot of accidental deaths of human being happen all the time that we could just not care about. So it's like, should nobody wear seatbelts? Should we just take away seatbelt laws because any car accident that happens without seatbelts is technically just an accidental death? If someone goes 130 kilometers an hour down the road and wraps their car around a telephone pole, is that an accident? Like, what is an accident at that point?
Metaphysics is just going to be constrained by logic.
Not if the metaphysical position is they work in mysterious ways. That is a valid metaphysical position. It is one tier.
I think that's okay. So we're probably going to agree that God works in mysterious ways is a boring cop out as far as the conversation goes, and that's when somebody is saying that they've lost the conversation at that point.
People die over this.
Yeah, that's a problem, right?
It's not a problem for them.
No, Vosh, the answer you're supposed to say is it's not a problem. Your argument would be that it's not a problem for people who aren't, for atheists. People who are anti-theists don't have this problem, and then you have to fight on that. It's not a problem for them.
All right, let's be center.
Like, that's the problem, is that it's not a problem for them. That's the toxic part of it. Thank you, we agree. What the fuck? That's so weird. I don't know. How do you miss his own argument?
I think that we're entering a non-productive space, and I want to see if we can find a productive space on this.
The groundwork here is not workable. If there is a material belief that is rooted in a metaphysical presupposition that can't be logically argued against, then there's no way to move them off that belief outside of hitting them on the head and hoping
Logic is a really good. Logic is a really good tool against somebody who's holding a logically ridiculous position if you can get them to understand the fallaciousness in it.
Can you explain
but you have to get them
why
to
you believe in the gods? Just really quick.
I went through that argument a minute ago with respect to experience. So
you realize that your brain is like a faulty meat computer that can interpret.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's something with absolute confidence. I think the
logic doesn't have to be sound. That's like there's a reason why we use like things like words like logically sound. You can still be logical and be wrong. What is this weird argument? I bet you that Vosh is about to say that, like, yeah, but that's illogical for you to believe in a god when there isn't one there. Well, no, based on my experience, like, this is so dumb.
Getting into a discussion about whether or not the gods exist is going to be something that is going to require a whole nother conversation, I think, especially with the amount of resistance that you're putting up to it. Let's just be fair.
It doesn't require convo. They don't. There's no evidence for it. We can
Sure there is. You have experiential evidence is something that you can engage with theologically. Say what?
What experiential evidence is there for the existence of the gods?
We have multiplicity of spiritual experiences in humans across the world.
That's not an answer. Humans have had multiplicities of lots of things. That's not. Our brains are faulty. We interpret our dying moments as spiritual experience.
What you're giving is a logical argument that one can be an atheist, and I agree with you. One can be an atheist logically, and that's fine.
That's the only logical argument that you can have, or at least an agnostic. Yes.
And this is where, all right. So then what I'm going to do is, instead of like getting into an argument with you on this, is defer to the existing philosophical debates on PhD level in the highest echelons of this conversation, where they're going back and forth with each other, and that the atheist philosophers are not saying what you're saying to their opponents.
That's fine. They're all cuckolds.
Oh my
People
God.
have been talking about dragons for hundreds of years. Does that mean dragons are real? People have shared. We have a cultural imagination.
Historically, we're pretty confident that dragons do not exist, but as far as philosophy is concerned, the confidence level is significantly lower with respect to gods.
I think about as many people right now believe in dragons as they do Odin and stuff. Those numbers are probably not too far off.
I would doubt that.
I would highly doubt that.
How can you possibly argue the validity of one particular religious system when the world moved on from it, and the evidence is, oh yeah, well, I know our brains can weakly interpret like liminal experiences as supernatural, depending on their cultural influences.
If you want to talk about potentiality, right? And you want to hold that potentiality is a valid cause for holding a position, then you're going to get into potentiality regarding the gods. And then now it's valid to hold that position because our brains are potentially engaging in hallucinations with respect to spiritual experiences. We're also potentially dealing with reality when we have spiritual experiences. Both are true, right?
Yeah, I don't know. God, I have to take a piss. Hold on. Let me just go quickly through this. I'm gonna run upstairs and take a piss. I might leave the video playing. Like, so the issue is like with the mind. We don't know what the fuck is going on up there. So yeah, you can have, when you have an experience, it can either be a hallucination. What the fuck? Am I okay? A hallucination? Hold on, I can't even say the word right now. This is actually...
As far with reality when we have spiritual experiences.
Illusion. I don't know why.
Both are true.
Sorry, I just needed to hear other words for a second. Hallucination. What the fuck was that? Illusion. It could be an illusion. Oh, hallucination. I was mixing the two words together. Jesus fucking Christ. It could be a hallucination or it could be a reality. And there's no provable way that we could figure that out right now. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence to go for it. But that doesn't mean it's illogical. So somebody could have a spiritual awakening or whatever, you know, and maybe it's drug induced, right? And maybe they are having hallucinations. They're having illusions. They're having hallucinations due to a drug induced like area, but they might call that experience that they have in there a religious and spiritual experience that they went through. And what they learn from that experience is their religion. And that's not illogical. That is perfectly logical.
True, right? It's as far as the potentiality is concerned, this is why there's agnosticism when it comes to what the settled matter on this is. It's not that when you get into the philosophical tradition of debate around this issue on the highest levels, it's not a settled science.
It's not a settled science because there's never been a start to the science. It's not a settled anything.
Settled philosophy then. Science is the wrong term, you're correct. But philosophy would be science would be a subset of philosophy. And
I agree with that.
right.
But it's
so
definitely not a science. There's no empirical evidence for any of it.
I agreed. I've already given you that. It's not like theology is not a science in the same way, well, that a lot, any philosophical system that doesn't fall under science is not a science, right? I hesitate to say which way history goes, but it's where you get into questions of soft sciences, whether or not they're sciences or whatever the fuck.
I think generally speaking, it's best when we adjust our beliefs in accordance with the evidence, because if we make wild leaps and start basing ethical arguments and material understandings on highly speculative, like very circumstantial or possibly non-existent evidence, you like run into massive problems when it comes to like social cohesion, ethical reasoning, stuff like that. I think it's important.
Here we have a lot of agreement. Yeah.
We scale it back. Now, this isn't an argument against philosophy or like analytical engagement. I mean, everyone can have different opinions in the world around them. That's fine. But I think there's a big difference between like varying philosophical perspectives and saying that like we live in a world with spirits or with gods or there is an afterlife, because now you're talking about things that affect what people might make logical arguments off of. And if a person believes in the afterlife, how can I tell them that murdering people is wrong if they think it'll send them to a better place?
I would love it if everybody tempered their beliefs with respect to available evidence on the matter. And that would be something that, like, I believe that I'm doing that with respect to my religious exploration. I hold that I don't know that the gods exist, but I'm exploring with respect to my experiences. And my belief in the gods is provisional on the basis of that respect. Right. And I think that if more people did that, we'd have a healthier engagement with respect to religion. And I think that if you want to talk, again, toxic spirituality is when you don't do that.
You can't tell a person, hey, only have faith when the evidence demands it. That's not how faith works.
I think that you can temper your position with respect to available evidence. That's reasonable.
That's not what faith is.
Again, I'm pagan, not Christian. We're looking at faith completely differently, I think. So Christians have, I think, a really toxic narrative around faith.
When you say you have faith in something, you're saying that in spite of a lack of evidence, you still believe that thing exists.
No, I think it's a bad definition of faith. With faith, when Christians are using the word faith, they're using it under the context of trust, that they trust in the Bible or something like that. They have faith in the Bible, so they're trusting it. And I think that that's a bad narrative when your trust in something is overruling counter evidence. Counter evidence is the issue. That I think an absence of defeaters and an absence of harm is not necessarily a problem, but in presence of defeaters and in presence of harm, that's where you get serious issues.
That's just a God of the gaps argument, though. At that point, you just get to fill in the blank, and that also lets you speculate on the afterlife.
Absence of defeaters is philosophy. Like if you can hold a position, absence of defeaters, and also discussing whether or not it's likely, right? Like
no,
that's a whole.
Because there's no defeaters. That's the invisible unicorn argument. Like, there might be an invisible unicorn right behind me that's only invisible when people look at it, but at all other times is fully visible and
if somebody's all right, let's go with the invisible unicorn. If somebody's engaging in a religious practice with invisible unicorn because they have experiences with respect to the invisible unicorn, and they're giving offerings to the invisible unicorn that are not something that is going to be substantially affecting their life, they're engaging in that religion in a way that is not harming anybody else. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because in absence of defeaters, in absence of harm, you're engaging in a practice that, all right, fine, whatever. It's your life. I don't give a shit.
No, it's not absence of harm, though. They live with the constant belief that there's a fucking mystical creature hovering right behind them. This is mental illness.
If getting into religion is mental illness territory is also not the take. DSM-5 even goes against that.
Well, they're also full of cops. No,
oh my God.
No. The belief that there's that's literally a definition of schizophrenia. The only difference between schizophrenic diagnoses and some religious beliefs is the legitimacy of the institutions they're pulling from. Let's be real. Like, the idea of like, yeah, there's an invisible like spirit hanging around me at all times, like hovering right behind me. Like, yeah, come on, that would be diagnosable. That would, even if it's like a, yeah, it would.
It depends on like how it's being approached, right? And I think that I'm not somebody who's familiar with diagnoses process when it comes to schizophrenia. So that's an aspect of the debate that I would just say that I don't know a whole lot on. And I think that what happens with a religious comparison between religion and mental illness is that it takes the stigma against mental illness and applies it unnecessarily onto religion in a way that is engaging in another supremacy narrative. And that's an issue that I have with that kind of approach. There is a video, although by an atheist, if you want to check it out, by Shannon Q, talking about this narrative, comparing religion to mental illness, that I advise anybody in your audience to check out. Shannon Q, religion. Please stop calling religion and mental illness is the name of the video.
Do you think schizophrenia is bad?
I think schizophrenia should be treated. If you want, just my, you know what I mean? I'm not against, like, if somebody has a mental illness, they should seek treatment.
Possibly differentiate between a person who religiously believes there's the invisible unicorn, blah, blah, and a person who believes it through psychosis.
Again, this is a DSM-5 question. I would consult people that are experts on that issue. As far as, like, how you do it, you know what I mean? Like, we can talk about ethically, because I know plenty of people who are schizophrenic and religious, right? That they're dealing with some kind of psychosis and they're also religious. And there are ways of separating the two as far as, like, how they approach things. And they're on treatment for one, and it helps with the schizophrenia, and yet they remain religious. This is something that I've seen a few times within my community. I think that if you're getting, if you have mental illness and are religious, you should seek treatment for the mental illness. Absolutely.
Wouldn't that potentially just mean that some religious beliefs are just identical to schizophrenia but resistant to treatment?
I think that mental illness can take on religious themes, but that doesn't mean that religion is a mental illness.
Well, I certainly think some things that people believe for religious reasons tend to have them overlapping with diagnosable symptoms of mental conditions.
Yeah, just because the overlap doesn't mean that they're the same thing.
No, I don't.
That's getting into correlation causation territory.
I don't think they're the same thing. I just think it's notable. Like, I mean, there are.
You can note it all you want to, but I'd say this is a conversation you need to have with an expert, not me.
Fair. I mean, there have been suicide cults throughout history, but I don't know if you can make an ethical argument against ritualistic suicide if you thought that it was
again
like
harmful practices, man. Is getting right back. That's Theophrastus. If you're harming yourself with your religious practice, that's the problem.
What if they think they'll be tortured forever if they don't do it? That's the whole point of hell, right? If they don't do the ritualistic.
Then you have we can have a conversation about toxic religions too, right? If you want to have like a religion that necessitates harmful practices, that's a toxic religion. And again, this gets into that analogy that we were talking about earlier with respect to toxic masculinity and toxic spirituality. There are toxic spiritualities, absolutely. There's also toxic masculinity. There's also toxic expressions of a lot of things. But there's also expressions of those things which are not toxic, including masculinity and spirituality.
The difference is, as long as a secular person shares my axioms, I can explain to them how some elements of masculinity are harmful. But if a person has a religious belief in the validity of things they do that are toxic, I can't make that argument against them.
Is the crux of this just that arguing against them is hard? Like, because again, I've had these conversations with people that like hold a position pretty strongly and still move them away from engaging in harmful practices on the basis of these arguments that I'm giving you.
Okay,
I've been able to do this, and you're just saying it's hard, so you don't want to. Like, it's just this is really strange.
It's always possible because people are irrational. So even if a person has a logically consistent metaphysical belief in God telling them to kill the whores, you can still pull them out of that if you, I don't know, hit them in the head hard enough or give them ice cream or something. People are weird. It's about the underlying logic. And it's about who you can reform and who you have to kill, right? So imagine your grand poobah of society, okay? The vast majority of people who commit crimes, vast majority, have basically the same axiomatic beliefs as most people, want people to be good and happy, you know, crimes, they hurt someone, you know, even murderers sometimes, you know, it's like, life is complicated. They can be reformed, and I want that. But some people have axiomatic beliefs that are different. Some people believe on a moral level that it's, say, good to kill certain types of people, like on a fundamental basis, not because they think it'll make society better, not because they think it'll improve the life of themselves or others, purely for its own right. It's a separate axiom. These people can't be reformed. They have to be jailed indefinitely, or they have to be executed. It's the only thing you can do. You can hope they'll change, sure, but, you know, well, that's what the indefinite prison sentence is for, right? You see if their cognition shifts. The issue is that religion is like a gigantic other axiom. And while there are people who have that process, whose morals will align with mine, if they end up having a disagreement with me on principal ethical positions rooted in metaphysics, I can't do shit outside of the aforementioned ice cream or hitting them on the head. That's like really dangerous socially. It's dangerous for a person to be able to say, I think we should be able to kill black people, and to have internally a bulletproof, literally unarguable justification for it. You can't argue them out of that position because their position is completely internally consistent. They don't think that because it'll make the world better. They think it because their God told them that's what's right. You can't convince them out of that. You can hit them on the head, or you can give them ice cream. Maybe. That's
I think you're
my
talking,
worry.
again, you're talking about people that are just devoid of ethical concerns. This is not a criticism of religion. This is a
No, they just
criticism
have a
of people
different-
that don't have ethics.
No, they do have ethics. They're informed by their God.
Or that maybe they have ethics, but their ethics are malformed in some way. Right?
Malform-
Like
okay,
we're
malform-
talking about malformation of ethics.
Religion
Great. You
malforms
can
the
criticize those things on an ethical level without saying that, religion bad. Because again, this has been a slippery slope conversation where like they have religion, therefore they could XXXX. And that seems to be the crux of your point.
It doesn't matter even if they don't do that. It's not a slippery slope. It starts at a plateau and stays there. It's being religious opens
If
you
it
up
starts at
to
the plateau and
supernatural
stays there, then you have to argue this is a commonality with everybody who's religious at that point, which I don't think that you can do.
No, just because religion necessarily entails a breach in axiomatic vulnerability doesn't mean that unethical behavior will be demonstrated in all of them. It's a numbers game. It's like imagine
You're basically arguing
bad.
now religious people can't be ethical because like
No,
that's
no, I'm not.
Okay,
It's-
all right. Then what are you doing? Because that's what it sounded like to me.
It's
So
a
go for it.
problem. It's like having a hole in the house. It's like imagine you took every house in America and you're like, okay, it's bad to have a hole in your roof, like a little hole, maybe the size of a finger,
Mhm.
There are going to be houses that are in great condition that have that hole in their roof. And there are going to be houses in shit condition that have non-leaky roofs. But it's always bad to have the hole in the roof. And sometimes that hole being in the roof means that after a rainstorm, the interior of the house can flood. And that's that. It's always bad to have the hole in the roof. But that's not me saying that like it's impossible for a house to be good if it has the hole in the roof, or that it'll always lead to disaster or anything like that. It's
Right.
just it's a vulnerability that can lead to problems with no potential upside. It's just a bad vulnerability in our cognition. It's just a fault. It's like another cognitive bias, right? Tons of people have basic cognitive biases, like gambler's fallacy or like sunk cost fallacy. We adopt these, we internalize them. It's always bad to have them, but lots of people are fine and successful in spite of having them, right? Like you want to get rid of those. But I can make rational arguments in favor of getting rid of those logical fallacies. The religious thing is self-justifying, which is the real issue.
You can make like rational arguments within religion. I thought we already agreed on that as well. Right.
I mean,
like and again, making ethical. So when we're talking about like the hole in the building, right? For me, that hole in the building, I might be looking at it differently because the building for me will be like, all right, here's your spirituality is the building, and the hole in it can be any number of things that allows you to slip in some sort of authoritarianism. And that's where that toxicity is going to be of a reasonable discussion. But you're talking about the house with respect to being like one's worldview, and the whole is going to be spirituality, which allows other things to sneak in, right?
Yeah,
so
because you're allowing superstition to affect your reasoning.
All right, well, we can call the whole superstition, and then we're going to be more or less on the same page. But superstition, from my perspective, is going to be akin to toxic religiosity.
No, okay, then not superstition. Any religiosity of any or
Right,
any.
it's a spiritual God belief, that kind of thing, right? That's
Any
your,
spiritual,
so
anything,
yeah, and
tarot
that's
cards,
your position is going to be that. But that's where we're just going to be disagreeing, because we're talking past each other at that point, because you're holding that religion is bad axiomatically, basically.
Yes.
Right. And that's not. I don't think that that's productive. You don't have an argument for that at that point. It's just axiomatic.
No, it's axiomatic in the sense that it's a defiance of a basic axiomatic principle I hold relating to truth, which is yes, I believe we should root our beliefs.
Right. So then it's not an axiom. You're justifying it in some way, but the justification seems to be related always to toxic expressions of spirituality and not spirituality in and of itself. You're just blaming the spirituality.
but you never want the hole in the roof, even if it doesn't always lead to the flood.
You're just calling religion the hole in the roof in the analogy, and I think that's disanalogous at that point.
Because you're opening yourself up to supernatural justifications for ethical and empirical positions, which is the problem. So if you open yourself up to that,
this is like non-empiricism bad, basically, but in order to get to empiricism, you have to hold non-empiricism positions in the first place. Yes, there's a whole conversation in philosophy about how being empiricist only winds up being a self-defeating position, and that's...
I acknowledged right off the bat,
right.
axioms are unjustified.
I'm appealing to that. I'm not trying to get you in a gotcha with that. I'm appealing to that. We agree on that already, right? So when you're saying that, like, the problem with this is that that there's an acceptance of things that are not empirical, we've already agreed that that's a base issue that we all have to deal with in order to explore things in the first place. I think to summarize basically where I'm at on that perspective, I think that if you're going to be engaging with spirituality, there are certain assumptions that you're going to be making about your experiences in order to explore spirituality. People are going to be doing that, and you can engage with that in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. And toxic religiosity is going to be when you're exploring that in an unhealthy way, and religiosity that lives within these ethical constraints, right? Where you're not engaging in your religion in a way that is unethical, is going to be a more healthy manifestation of religiosity. And we should be fighting for that and not against everybody who's religious.
It feels like, okay, here's the problem. It feels like you have a bunch of people who are just going about their lives, living a nice secular life, and then you walk in and you're like, I've got a deck of cards right here. Look at this. I will do whatever the deck of cards tells me to do. And it's 52 cards. And 50 of them tell you to do like normal good things. And 2 of them tell you to like rape and murder. And you're like, okay. Yeah, and you're just like randomly flipping through them and you just do whatever the cards say. And when people inevitably confront you on the consequences of your newfound life decision, you're like, look, overwhelmingly, these cards tell me to do good things.
Right.
You know?
We should have a conversation about whether or not those cards should be in the deck at that point. And that's when you get into religious reform.
I don't think you can make that argument with religious people, because once a person believes in the existence of a god, once a person is open to supernatural arguments, they're open to them holistically. This
is a regular argument. This is a regular conversation within heathenry where we're talking about, like, when you get into the Folkus crap, and they're saying that because thing X existed in history with Vikings practicing it or whatever, right? And then they say, because that was the case, we should still be doing it now because we're trying to revive the tradition and act in accordance with it, right? That's an argument that these kind of people will make. However, one of the things that I'm pushing back on that with personally, and I know a lot of other people who do the same thing, are saying, look, just because something exists in history is not justification enough to say that we should revive it absolutely. The people in the past did slavery. Christians in the past did slavery. Vikings in the past did slavery and all that other kind of shit. We can revive the traditions without bringing with it all of its toxic bullshit. So you can remove the toxic bullshit because it's toxic bullshit and continue engaging in the traditions.
What you're trying to do right now is make a logical argument. The problem is we're talking about religion. It's rooted in
and I have seen effect to it in my activism on that issue.
Yeah, people can be moved, but it's a weakness that doesn't need to exist there. And they move because they move. By the way, they're wrong to do it. If there's a Christian who believes that whites are ordained better than blacks by God, and you convince them it's not the case, they're demonstrating weakness, because metaphysically they have as strong a justification for that position as you do for secular human racial equality. The only real ethical, logical solution to that conundrum should be both of you drawing pistols. But because people are weak and culturally influenced, people with grounded, logically consistent religious arguments for horrible things move over due to peer pressure, which is kind of part of what I want to do, except with all of it. Because I don't think we get any benefits from this particular mode of understanding the world. I don't believe in any of this superstitious stuff, and I don't think you derive any truth from it.
You don't believe... I'm not saying that you need to believe it. I'm saying that if you're going to be criticizing it in a way that is operable to making a movement work, pluralism is going to be the preferable approach of the criticism.
But I'm in favor of including Christians and Jews and Muslims and all the religious people.
Which means you should reform to a pluralistic position rather than an anti-theist one anyway, because that's consistent with your goals that you've expressed.
No, again, believe that people with toxic masculine tendencies should be part of the movement, but I will still criticize toxic masculinity. But all religion is toxic.
Right.
So...
And pluralism is not saying we need to cast out everybody that demonstrates some sort of non-pluralistic aspect, right? Otherwise, pluralism would just be incompatible with many forms of Christianity. But as long as those Christians who are engaging with a movement are engaging with it in a way that is pluralistic, in that they're respecting others and not engaging in proselytory attitudes, then they're fine, right? Like that's if they're respecting those boundaries, there's no issue. Just like you're going to be fine with somebody who is expressing toxic masculine traits within your movement, so long as they're not creating victims within your movement.
Well, I don't have an issue with people who are religious in my community. I've gotten emails about that, and I always tell them to welcome it.
And that's good. And ethical criticisms. And I've gotten people that are religious in your community telling me that while they appreciate a lot of that kind of, that they're likewise appreciating that, they're also frustrated with the anti-theist thing because it's not necessary. It's wasted energy. That's why I'm making the argument for here is a preferable narrative for you to be able to engage with.
Who are like, I used to like Vosh, but like he was too like, I'm really anti-Semitic, and he was just too not anti-Semitic.
I'm not talking about people like that. What I'm talking about is people that are still in. No, there's talking about people that are in your community like you and have criticisms. This is very different from what you're talking about, where it's like that hate you now because of whatever. I'm not super intimately familiar with your community, but the people that I'm talking about are people that have positive opinions on you, which is the reason why I'm having this conversation in the first place. There's a lot of crossover between us.
I'm not going to cut myself and pretend that I don't have issues with the consequences of religious thinking because there are people in my community who don't like it.
I'm not saying that you should. No, and that's not the argument. The argument is that if you're going to be engaging with this, you should be engaging with it effectively and in a way that is consistent with your positions. And that's why I was saying that you should be against toxic expressions of religiosity and engage in it in a pluralistic narrative, because it is largely the behaviors that you're already engaging with and consistent with your goals in coalition building.
That would be cucking myself.
Why?
Because I'm not.
It's largely what you're already doing. It's just that it takes away the toxic criticism aspect that hits people that you're on your side. It's not cucking yourself.
That's fine. No, no, you're describing self-cucking here. You're saying, hey, you have a broad criticism, but there are people on that you're getting some friendly fire in your community here. So you should, lower it so that you're only criticizing the worst elements of the things you dislike.
Not simply because you're hitting your allies. If you're hitting your allies on something that is worth criticizing, then that's the toxic masculinity conversation, right? Like that's fine. The issue isn't that. The issue is that you have the opportunity to be able to criticize toxic spirituality and not hit your allies and get the same results, because all of the criticisms that you've been offering me in this conversation are with respect to toxic spirituality.
Nope, they're with spirituality in general. And I think that these are the arguments that I want to make. Criticizing toxic religiosity, in addition to being a different argument and not one that I believe in, would be like super cucked. Like, oh yeah, guys, I don't have an issue with all religion. It's just like I don't like it when Christians say other people are worse than them. Mega cucked. I can.
Why is that cucked? What's the issue?
Because it's a lie. It's inauthentic. I don't.
Okay, I get that it's not like in line with what your intuitions are currently. That's why I'm trying to make an argument against it.
Don't denigrate it. It's not my intuitions. It's my position. It's my ethical framework. And yeah.
What is your ethical framework? Okay, all right, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, in this case, that religion and supernatural thinking is bad. If I cheapen that, if I'm like, okay, well, I'll only share half my position on this because people in my community don't like it, I feel like I'd be doing them a disservice.
No, that's not the reason. That's why I'm saying that. That's why I'm trying to provide a better argument of like what your position should be given your values. If you're a consequentialist and a utilitarian, and you're wanting coalition building, then anti-theism is not consistent with those things. Okay. Unless you're just saying, well, it's my position, so I'm just going to fire blindly. At which point, fine. I guess that's what you can do, but it winds up being a bad position that is not in line with your other goals.
Advocacy for coalition building doesn't mean that you can't criticize things in groups that you want to coalition build.
And I'm not saying you should stop criticizing religion. I'm in fact giving you the ability to criticize religion through other arguments that aren't just religion bad.
I don't believe in. I don't believe in your arguments.
You don't believe you don't believe that harmful practices are bad. Right. We agree that a harmful practice, like so far,
practice included ending malaria. So no, I don't think we agree on that.
All right.
Well, we have
there's
completely
a
different
bit of an
ethical
impasse
framework
there.
on top of the religiosity here. But no, it's no argument against religion is sufficient unless it addresses its roots. You know, you might as well be painting over.
Well, yeah, if you want to, if your argument is against religion broadly, then sure. It's just that within any effective movement, you're going to be having religious people in it. So you should be examining, all right, we have religious people. What makes those religious people a problem? Is there something specific that they do? And it's not the God belief, I think. The thing that they're doing, that when it manifests in something that is harmful, is when you have these supremacy narratives, fundamentalism, extremism, authoritarianism, right?
Okay.
And when those are
I feel
manifest within those religiosity, that's when you get toxic.
What you're saying is that you should only be concerned with holes in your roof if you live in areas that have a monsoon season. Like, that's how I feel. I feel like I'm saying, hey guys, you should have watertight roofs. And you're like, hold on.
It's saying that you can't have like a fundamentalism with respect to like a drizzle. I think that when you get with Christianity, I think that you can have Christians in your movement and still criticize Christianity for its authoritarian tendencies. And I think that you can even find probably criticisms of my own religion if you're going to be operating on that standard.
I feel
because
like
there are.
There's only like 15 minutes left of this. I don't know.
Are authoritarian expressions of heathenry, and we should talk about those things, and we should be finding ways to fight them. But saying
I don't think this conversation this is really boring now. So in summary of this, to conclude, it seems like Vosh just doesn't understand. Like, yeah, it just doesn't understand that anything you do can be positive or toxic. There's nothing inherently toxic about religion. There are just toxic aspects of religion. That's all. That's it. I don't know. And he just can't explain. He can't explain why at all. It seems. I don't even know. I have no idea what the fuck Vosh's position is. I have no fucking idea. Yeah, this chatter says it perfectly. Vosh just has no answer and keeps retreating to, but religion is bad because it is. Which is the same toxic thing that this guy says like religion does. But you're doing it from a secular worldview. Like, you're proving this guy's point in this thing. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's it. That chatter's got it. Vosh just keeps retreating to, but religion bad because it's bad, and then that's it. I don't know. So, that's the end of this. I'm gonna be right back. And, Papa bless. Okay. Very nice. Okay, Oh. You're welcome. Baku. Any other memes can go off? No. I don't have time for this. I'm gonna go through practice. I realize the time is all fuck. Okay. Might leave soon. I have something at 3.
Hello from Baku, where we're looking forward to a
it's
weekend
1:30.
of racing among the medieval and the modern. Here at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.
Get ready with Liberty Race.
Drivers will be battling it out on the streets of the Baku city circuit, a real contradiction of a track. From the long main straight, where the less drag the better, to the tight turns where downforce is a necessity. Teams are going to have to work hard to get that balance right. We're about halfway through the season now, and there's still plenty of time for everything to change. All eyes are on the teams and how they tackle the rest of the year. So, without further ado, let's get started.
Okay, good, good. Yep. Yep.
Today, we see the culmination of the team's practice efforts translate to the all-important qualifying session. While many eyes may be drifting ahead to the big race, the teams and their drivers will be fully focused on the task at hand here today. Those who make the most of the free practice sessions will head into qualifying knowing that they've given it their all and done everything in their power to cement themselves a good, strong position on the asphalt tomorrow. Strap yourselves in. This is Formula One.
Oh, not so good. Look at that! I'm a genius. Oh my god. Not so much of a genius. Okay, we can try to fix this. Yeah, we can do that. Here. I'm gonna save and stop playing. Oakley Dokley. Thank you for tuning in, Reno Dabachino. I appreciate you. I love you. And goodbye.